So everyone has waited into the end. Are there any questions about these 20 topics? Okay, excellent. Well, the final 4 topics that I guess I kind of have to put them all into one because today's the last Tuesday. Next week I start acupuncture school, so Tuesdays are not an option for me. But let's see, I did dream walking and I talked about the difference and the similarities between shifting and modulating the lens of perception. One of the things that is interesting about this is that I can talk about all of these things and connect every single topic together. Like I can put these together into a harmonious, clear, and understandable format. So one of the reasons I started doing the 20 topics is because I think it's important. Specifically, what I think is important is the capacity of human cognition, the capacity and the ability of the human mind. Like, what are we doing? Like, what are we really doing as a species on this planet with our mind, with our body, with our energy body, day-to-day activities, hopes, dreams, goals, aspirations? Like, really, what are we doing and what is this all about? One of the things that I came to is space. That's I don't know how else to describe that. I just came to it from doing my practice. I couldn't help but notice that thoughts had less momentum, thoughts became less frequent, thoughts became more, I wouldn't say positive necessarily, but they became more logical and productive. And then the thing that I could feel the most is when thoughts became very creative, when thoughts became compassionate. And I can break down compassion very simply. It's the human tendency is to overcomplicate things for one reason or another. And compassion doesn't have to be a complicated thing. It's very, very simple.
What
But
was the second thing you said? Thoughts
the second,
became more, um,
I don't know. They became less frequent. There was less of a frequency. There was less strength, less momentum. They, I wouldn't say were positive, but they were productive, at times positive, but not getting down on myself, not
I
trying to figure
found
things
that
out.
they became more flexible.
That's a
Like
good word. Sure.
they were so rigid for me before. Like I had to find something, a thought, and hold it, and it had to be a right. Unless I found something that was righter, that was more right than the thought that I thought before. And now I don't have that. They're way more flexible and malleable. I guess that's creative.
Yeah, I think adaptable. That's a part of the adaptation principle. Of course, when the mind is more flexible and adaptable, then the body will be, life experience will be, all of those things will be. But
But anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted your
no, that's
explanation of how you got to space.
right. Well, not so much how I got to space, because that's what we've been talking about. You know, those are the first 3 layers of the practice. I've organized it for other human beings to potentially pick up and run with if they so choose. But I think the real thing that kind of struck me is, well, what do I do? So now that I have created cognitive space, now what? Because the world isn't doing it in general. So the funny thing is, Hugh, that's not funny, it's tragic. But one of the funny, tragic things about what I'm kind of planning to talk about, what I'm going to talk about, is that everybody wants it. Everybody is seeking it. Everybody is trying to find it in one way or another, but they just don't really see the perspective of what they want, of what they're chasing, just isn't clear. And oftentimes it's because they're confusing the object or the goal for the response, the body's response, the mind's response. And that's really what we want, is that feedback, the emotional soup, the vibrational uh, derivative of whatever it is. And that falls in line with classic Abraham Hicks, that it's not the things and the stuff that people want, it's the feeling that those things bring them. So there came a moment, and it was a couple years ago probably, when, no, a few years ago, I can think. That's the thing about the practices. It works in such little bits and it adds up, and you can see this accumulation over time, and you can see it add up over time. But there's not really like little individual points where it's like the day before and the day after were completely different. So that's one of the things about this practice. The way that it works is in little itty bitty bits that accumulate over time, and then before you know it, you can't help but notice. It's kind of the way that we do things with the practice. So one of the things that I noticed is that creating space in the overall amount of thought reduces what I call interference. If we look at the word interference, it means that something is trying to get through. Something is trying to move naturally. Something is trying to move fluidly, but it's not being allowed to. It's being interrupted. It's being interfered with in some way. Does that make sense? And of course, we know that the primary form of, well, so what are we interfering? Well, if we want to be just a little bit more literal, creativity, or all of the things that can come to our mind when space has been created. Like I talked about more productive thoughts. I talked about more creative thoughts, more compassionate thoughts. Those can still come out of the space as well. But what I noticed, and this has kind of been maybe one of the reasons for doing the 20 topics, is that space and what we do with it, I view, and I could be wrong, I doubt it, but I view as absolutely essential for the human species. So what I'm talking about is that, and this goes all the way back to the original topic, the human imbalance, is that at some point, the human species in general, this is the fifth destroyer, began thinking almost all the time. Doesn't really matter what we're thinking about, because we're being very literal. You know, it doesn't matter if it's good or bad, positive or negative. We're talking about the sheer volume from the time that a person wakes up, from the time that a person goes to bed. And now in this practice, I think people have seen glimpses of a mind that is stepping out of that dynamic, where we are creating space in the overall cognition, and that allows something to come through. Whereas before it was being interfered with, and it's the thoughts that are interfering, the repetitive patterns, the sheer volume of the thinking that is interfering with that, whatever it is that we're talking about coming through. One of those things that comes through, creativity, but primarily are all of these things that can be felt. So the connection to the moment that can be felt, when I talk about that luminous effect that can be felt, compassion, natural compassion can be felt when you're not trying. When you just create space, you care about other human beings, you care about the earth in general, you care about yourself. These things happen and arise naturally. So the bottom line is, how do we create space? And so we've created the Qigong practice for that. That's how we create the space. And then hydrostasy, of course, is what do we do with the space? But I have gotten to the point where I believe that what we're doing with our mind is absolutely essential to the human species' survival. In one way we can look, if we look at human evolution, you can look at other animals. So there's ways to see this empirically in the animal kingdom. One second. When you look at orcas, Shayna and I were watching a little thing about killer whales. Orcas are incredibly intelligent. They're very likely self-aware, which is a very important word. But they don't have the access to food that we do, or they haven't created the environment to fit them. they're still adapting to their environment in a way that all of their cognition, their creativity, their focus, from what I can tell, I don't know, I'm not an orca, it goes towards killing. They're apex predators. So they haven't been able to really step out of the dynamic of everything is about survival. Humans have. Humans created their environment so that we can change the environment rather than adapting to it. If it's cold outside, we build a house. If it's too hot outside, we create an air conditioner. If it's storming, then we make a house, we make shelter. So human beings are so far removed from day-to-day survival things that has given cognition the opportunity to evolve, change over time. Because what are you doing if you're not sitting around hunting? What are you doing if you're not sitting around doing the things that you used to do for millions of years? So if we're not hunting, if we're not trying to gather our food, if we're not looking up at the sky for danger every day, what does the mind do? Well, it can do one of two things, really. It has the opportunity to evolve, adapt, and change over time, or it will self-destruct. And there's a lot of science fiction, and I can give probably 10 examples off the top of my head where science fiction became what we're interacting with today, where originally it was just a science fiction story. It was just an idea, cellular phones, all kinds of things. Or the idea of cordless, it's like, where's the wires? So, when I would see, different shows and you would see these things talking about the future, they talk about the human species in a way that there's this point. There's this point where a species that is self-aware, such as ourselves, a species that isn't fighting for survival on a daily basis, such as ourselves, they come to a point where they will either destroy themselves or a point where they will potentially evolve and grow and change. Does that make sense? And I'm not trying to be doom and gloom here because we are the hope in this story. Maybe. Does all this make sense so far? It's kind of roundabout. I get it.
Yes, I like that. Maybe.
I get the point. And it's not just the thinking. It's once we think, okay, we're self-aware and we have the capacity for thought, but once we switch the belief to, so therefore, more thinking makes us better. So thinking more about thinking and how we think and what we, then that makes us better and more adaptable and more evolved, and somehow that got corrupted, that idea. I mean, it's really a very basic idea that I let go of from this class was, if there's a problem, I have to think about it more because it requires more thought for me to find a solution. And that's not true.
No.
I'm proven to myself that that's not true just by accepting and trying on these techniques and doing this practice.
Mhm.
It doesn't help. It isn't the solution.
Mm-mm. Well, I mean, not necessarily, but I think the reason is imbalance. The reason is the cognitive focus went all in one direction. And then, of course, the human being's tendency to be self-centered. Things started to focus on my comfort, my luxury, me, and that kind of created the system that we're in, is the human being's tendency to be self-centered. Compassion is exactly the opposite of that, is that the human being is loosening that grip on the concept of self and is starting to take other people into account. And there's degrees to that. So there can be a little degree where you're like, well, maybe I can give them a blanket. I have two. That's a compassionate act. One of the things that they discovered with early humans is a human being with a broken leg that had been mended. And that proved that human beings at one point decided that we can help other human beings. In the animal kingdom, sometimes if you get a broken leg, you're left behind. They can't, you're a detriment to the rest of the group. And so, it's actually quite logical to leave that person or that animal behind. Otherwise, the entire herd or the entire group can get wiped out. And so that's basic logic. The good of the many outweighs the needs of the one. So we can see early in human history where humans started to take care for other human beings. And that was some of the earliest signs of caring and compassion, because other species don't always do that. Most other species, when an animal is injured, it's like, yeah, if you can keep up with us, you're good. But if you can't, you're on your own. And these are babies and adults, and it doesn't really matter if
They
you
do
can't
rescue each other. They do help rescue each other. Like
to a certain extent.
elephants will
Oh,
gather
not
to
elephants.
get the baby out of the
Ooh,
hole, you know?
we can't use elephants because elephants have been proven to have cognition of self-awareness.
Okay, sorry.
Uh, yeah, and they have self-domesticated. They're one of 3 animal species that have been identified to self-domesticate. And look at self-domestication. What is that? The body gets, because it's not fighting for survival, physical survival on a daily basis. What's going to evolve if you're not physically fighting all the time? The mind will evolve. And that's the key. We're no longer at the point where the human species needs to fight and be tough and be strong. And the only reason any of that is valued is when we're killing ourselves. When we have machines to do shit. You don't need to be jacked to do anything these days. You know, almost every job outside of a fireman, you can do skinny as a rail. It doesn't matter. So my point is that I have identified an easy categorization, because that's what I do. I categorize, organize, and it helps me remember. And if I remember, then I can apply things unto wisdom and yada, yada. So the idea is the difference between ordinary and non-ordinary cognition. And I have broken this down because everything in hydrostasy would qualify as non-ordinary cognition. So I'm going to kind of break down the difference between ordinary and non-ordinary. And then for the rest of your day, for the rest of your life, you will be able to say, here I am in this moment. Am I balancing ordinary with non-ordinary? So the first thing that I have to bust is the human mind's tendency to put one as more important or better than the other. So I have to put that to rest. The reason that non-ordinary cognition is so important, though, is because of the imbalance. That's the reason it needs to be emphasized. However, the way that I'm about to describe ordinary and non-ordinary cognition, you can see that they rely on one another. Like you really do need both. And counterbalance, we need more non-ordinary because we've been ignoring it for so long. So here's an example of non-ordinary cognition. Let's say Ida goes into her painting room. Her mind is clear. She's very relaxed. She walks in. The painting that she's working on speaks to her. It hits her. She has this great idea. She gets into this groove and this flow where there's nothing else in the world, you know, holding her down, weighing her down. The energy is flowing. If she paid attention to the body, which I'm sure she does, she would notice the lightness, and she would maybe even notice the sensation of things flowing through the body more. We start it in warrior training, but I'll really start to talk about it in hydrostasy, but that's the alchemy, where we start to actually sense the body's energy system. So ordinary and non-ordinary cognition, when Ida walked into that room and she felt that expansiveness, I have conveniently put that in the category of non-ordinary cognition. So one of the best ways to look at this, and there are other ways, and I can break it down, but one of the best ways to look at ordinary versus non-ordinary cognition is that ordinary cognition will be very physical. It will involve things that you can touch, taste, smell, talk about. All talking is ordinary cognition, by the way. There's nothing, speech is a form of ordinary cognition. Again, that doesn't mean that we, discard it and then we try to live in just non-ordinary. That doesn't make sense, because then you can't interact with other people, you can't interact with the life experience, and it gets really weird. So we'd really like to have a balance between both. So the ordinary cognition is going to be wrapped around and geared towards typically what we would view as very physical. We maybe even have science and experiments and theories and books on these subjects. That's great. Ida walking into that painting room or her studio feeling the expansiveness, finding the creativity and the flow, that's not really as physical. Now, there's physical elements. So I'm not saying that it's this weird, mysterious thing that we just can't talk about, because of course it isn't. It's emotional, it's vibrational, it's energetic. Everything that's happening to her when she walked into the painting room or the studio and she feels that connection, there are physical elements occurring. So it's not that black and white. But where are the feelings, Ida? Where is this occurring? Can you show me? And of course, the answers are typically no. I can't pull out my emotional soup and give it to you. You could take a blood test maybe, and then we could turn ordinary into non-ordinary and vice versa. But that feeling, and it is intentional. Yes, that's a key. Well, in this example, Ida, let's say it wasn't intentional. That's okay. You still found yourself in a state of non-ordinary cognition. Sometimes when people go on vacation, sometimes when people have something they're really good at and they can focus on their skill and their craft and the thing that they're really good at, they enter into a state that I would call non-ordinary cognition, and it's always accompanied by a feeling, an emotional, electrical, chemical derivative and response. Now, sometimes what we're sensing isn't an emotion, because when I touch this cup, this isn't an emotion that I'm touching. This is a physical thing. And in the other side of things, when we talk about non-ordinary cognition, there are senses, things that we can sense about our environment and about ourselves. And we may have an emotional derivative from that, but the initial sensory perception is the non-physical sensing the non-physical. And that's another reason I'll put it in non-ordinary, because we don't have a lot of descriptions and instrumentation, and we don't have textbooks that show how all of this is occurring yet. So for the sake of discussing this, I have put it into these two separate little tiny, or not tiny, but nice and neat categories of ordinary versus non-ordinary. And then we can talk about this. Somebody can throw something out and I'll tell you if it's ordinary or non-ordinary, or if it's that funky little thing that's kind of in between. Because sometimes what humans do is we'll have a non-ordinary experience from non-ordinary cognition, and then we'll start to think about it. Well, maybe we want to tell someone, maybe we want to write it down and make a story. So we have taken the non-ordinary cognition and turned it into ordinary. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. We can take something that's ordinary cognition, a story that you're reading, and it leads you into a state of non-ordinary cognition. Does that make sense?
Sure. It's just like what you're doing here. You're telling us about this, what you noticed in this transition, how this practice came into be, and you're looking back to try to deconstruct how it was, what you noticed, and just noticing that and delivering it to us in verbal form right now, or writing a book about it, is the mixture of the feeling, what you observed, which was non-ordinary cognition predominantly, and now there's an abundance of ordinary cognition, because to speak, to write, to do all that requires a lot of thinking and syntax and thought.
Yeah. So oftentimes the two are collaborating. They're working together, the ordinary and the non-ordinary. So we're going to do something that the human mind, we'll do something else rather than what the human mind typically wants to do, and that's put things in categories of better or worse, favored or unfavored. And quite frankly, both of these are favored. One is so that we could interact with our immediate environment. The other is so that we can interact with other aspects of the human experience, and that's the key. I believe, and I don't usually use the word believe, and I have to say I believe because it hasn't really been proven empirically to other people, but for me, it's less of a belief and more of an empirically evident thing. I can see it, I can feel it, I can taste it and touch it, but it's very personal, so I consider that abstract. It's abstract to the observer that's observing you, but it's not abstract to you. You feel it, you know it, it's there. If you're not sure about it, then you start trying to convince other people and trying to prove things, and then that's a bunch of BS that we don't really need. So The reason that this is so important is because the human experience is way, way, way imbalanced in just regular, ordinary cognition. What does regular, ordinary cognition look like? Complaining, thinking about what you want, thinking about yourself and your desires, thinking about other people and what they should or shouldn't be doing, thinking about how you're going to make money, how you're not going to make money, thinking about money, thinking at all. All of this is just an expression of ordinary cognition. And again, not good, not bad, not plus, not minus, but wildly imbalanced to the point that the interference is cutting the human species off to things that we have had access to for probably millions of years. And that is the unknown, the unseen, the energy aspect of the world is perceivable to the unknown energy aspect of the human being. And it's being some way, probably our brain, our heart, our body, our energy field, all of these things are working together to essentially create a composite of what is being perceived. We've talked about that a lot. That's the nature of perception. Perception is a composite. It is taking the available data and creating a picture that we can interact with. That is ordinary cognition. When you start to step outside of that picture, that is non-ordinary cognition. So I've divided these two, again, not to create separation, not to create division amongst people, and now we have ordinary and non-ordinary. None of that. It's for individual evaluation. As you're going through your day, you can look at yourself, especially if you are in hydrostasy, you have impeccable self-awareness. You're aware of your body, your mind, your emotional state, your behaviors, and everything as they occur. You see it. If you're about to say something that doesn't resonate, you might be able to curb it and not say it. Or you see it as you're saying it, and you're like, well, I've done this. I did this yesterday. That's why I'm mentioning it. But I started to say a word, and I'm like, well, no, wait a second. I retract that from the statement because I'm watching myself. I saw that habitual phrase start to come out, and then I paused it and brought it back. That is a result of impeccable self-awareness. Does that make you perfect? Does that make you a deity figure? Does that make you a guru? Absolutely fucking not. One of the great things about this system is it doesn't interact with those terms.
It's just a tool of awareness.
It is a tool of awareness, and you mean the non-ordinary cognition?
No, I mean watching your own behavior. Being the watcher is a technique.
Yes.
It's a tool for your
Well,
own awareness.
well, I'm going to take that a step further. I'm going to say it's one of the most critical components to the human experience. So I'm not, a tool sounds like something that we could have or not have, and maybe we could still get the job done. Maybe it might be a little bit more tricky. If I don't have a hammer, I could maybe use a
Maybe
book,
it's just the way that the way that
maybe
you
the
frame it.
terminology. Yeah.
Yeah, as the watcher, I don't actually seeing myself. That was a technique that I used in the beginning when it was an unfamiliar thing for me to do. But now it's just something that I feel like I'm always doing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I
And
don't feel like the watcher anymore. I am that. I'm all those things. So
right. Yes. And so I would say that that is all, you're giving an example of non-ordinary cognition, where you're able to see yourself as a part of the totality and feel that. That's non-ordinary. And people are chasing it. They're chasing it with drugs. They're chasing it with experiences. They're chasing it with the wide variety of things that they can chase it with, just to get glimpses of it, to get moments of it, not even realizing what they're chasing. And I would say it's a virtue of the human species. The human species, and this is kind of backing it up to week one, topic one, became self-aware. We could see ourselves apart and a part, apart and a part of our environment. And so that was the beginning of the cognitive evolution. That's one of the key elements of cognitive evolution. If we look at artificial intelligence, what is everybody afraid of? They're afraid of artificial intelligence becoming aware of itself, because if it becomes aware of itself, it may want to protect itself. And who is it likely to protect itself from? Human beings. And that's science fiction, and it's a realistic thought. I mean, it could be a potential threat. Potential, I
Well,
don't.
we don't like anybody becoming more aware of themselves than we are. We don't want any other country becoming more aware of
Mm.
itself than we are, because then we can't control it.
Yeah, and you can see that this has occurred because human arrogance is the result. Before you know it, we are the dominant species. God created us, and everything is in subject to the human. And it's like, oh, now we can't see the principles of nature because we've separated ourselves so far from it with belief and fairy tale that now it's so difficult to connect to the world around us because we're too busy viewing ourselves as superior. And God, that's such a sham. That's such bullshit. And I know, I'm sure to some extent, folks here agree that we are not necessarily superior to every other species on Earth. That makes no sense. Now, we have certain characteristics,
You mean of more value?
um, yeah, of more value, better than, superior. These are all words that I wouldn't use. I don't think any of those accurately describe a thing. So the idea is that with this practice, we embrace self-awareness, not as a concept, not as a philosophy, not as some abstract idea, because that's ordinary cognition, but with our attention and our intention. We shine that flashlight into the moment purposefully, and we create those states of non-ordinary cognition purposefully. And who knows to the extent that the human species can do this? Who knows what there is to discover, because the human species isn't in the position currently to discover anything because there's too much interference on a large scale. There's way too much interference. Does this make sense? Every now and then you get the cheeky artist who's just rejected the system and they tend to swim in non-ordinary cognition. Sometimes they don't do very good with ordinary cognition though, and so they don't always interact or thrive in social environments because they're clinging to one and rejecting the other, or they're finding very tumultuous ways to get to the non-ordinary cognition, which could, there's all kinds of ways to do that, and I don't really recommend any of them. Not necessarily. Any questions so far? So, Jerry, I would say that self-recognition and the ability to see oneself a part and a part of everything in the moment as it's happening is a virtue of cognition. I would say that there's probably other animals who are doing that as well. So human beings aren't unique in that regard, I don't think. So ultimately, I have divided and organized ordinary and non-ordinary so that when we're going about our day, we can evaluate, where is my mind and did I put it there? Have I put it 1 foot or maybe 2 feet because of the nature of my personal mind in non-ordinary cognition, or am I just doing the ordinary? And you can look at ordinary also as a statistical thing. What is most common compared to what is least common or less common? That dynamic should change. That is a great example of balance changing over time. Hopefully that will continue to change, and that dynamic continues to change to the benefit of the species. It will continue to change whether we like it or not. So the idea is that through the Igong system, layers 1 through 3, we find ourselves at a gate, and that gate is the space in the mind that one has created. That is and then of course the self-awareness. Those are the 2 primary prerequisites to be able to walk through that gate with volition, will, desire, and choice, and intelligence, and those 2 triangles that we put together. Is this making any sense so far? And that's kind of been my mission. And I see that as one of my missions moving forward. We talk about purpose. My purpose is the same purpose as everything else, to create. What is my individual earnest purpose? I create books, I create and organize systems for people to relax their mind and find this second attention or this non-ordinary cognition. I'm thinking about creating some fine art, doing a little painting and things like that. So I'm doing what everything else is doing. Every species on Earth is in a form of creation in one way or another. Every species on Earth is changing over time, and I'm really engaging that deliberately. Call that evolution, the evolution of mind. We can actually, because of our self-awareness, we can start to direct that. We can direct human evolution with attention and intention alone. We talk about intention. If you raise your arm, you just use intention, pure intention. And what is behind that? Muscle memory, things like that. So there are some mechanisms that go along with it, but you just intend your arm up. You don't, I am about to raise my arm. The arm has begun to lift. The arm is raising. I am doing this well. This is good. My arm has risen. Hello. So when we talk about intention and attention, everything in your life experience can be as simple as raising your hand, because your intention no longer has any lag. And before you know it, you're putting everything in your life experience exactly where you want it to be. Did you have a comment, Donna? I saw you reaching for the...
There's also a lot of other things involved in raising your arm that we
Sure.
don't pay attention to
Yeah.
because it's so automatic and we've done it so many times. But when you place your attention, then that's non-ordinary cognition. Like there's a proprioception that's happening when you raise your arm. I can raise my arm quickly and I know I'm not going to bang into anything, and I know that the ceiling is way above there, so I don't have to worry about if my fingers are going to slap against it. Like there's a whole bunch of things about our movement that we don't even place our attention on. So that they can be ordinary and non-ordinary.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think the point of that was intention, how you can just intend it. Yeah, there's all kinds of mechanisms involved, but that's not the point. The point is that you just intended it. You just raised it. And so I connect that with everything. You want a job, just get it. Just go do it. Do without all of the extra interference, because the extra interference isn't necessary. If you need an idea,
Right, that's what I meant too. I was trying to concur, but I didn't do it eloquently. That there's so many things involved. Sometimes you just need your intention and the rest will unfold, because you have so much already that you don't have to think about it all of the components before you do it. You don't have to get everything in order with cognition before you do it, because there's so much you already know. You have all the data you really need to move forward. Just do. That's where just do energy comes from. It doesn't require all that amount of thought and judgment.
Yeah. When we look around at our society and we look at some of ancient societies, we can see that one of those two groups was closer to non-ordinary cognition than the other, right? Littering, doing certain things to the environment, that just proves that you're not connected to it. It just shows that you are just swimming in your ordinary, selfish, me cognition if you have the nerve and the audacity to throw your trash on the ground, right? That's something that some people would say is very basic and nitpicky. I say it's an indication of the person's mind. If a person is willing to throw something on the ground without care, that shows that they're not connected to it. They're not connected to their environment. The environment isn't. But we look at an ancient society, certain ones, we like to clump up groups and say that all natives were, that's not true. You had some natives that were pulling out still beating hearts and offering it to the sun gods and shit like that. So that's like, don't want to go back to that. So it's not all, rainbows and kumbaya and everything else. So let's just be realistic here. But to a large extent, we can see that that native people were connected to non-ordinary cognition, and more than we are today as a society, as a group, in almost every country. So really what is occurring is that we're focusing on one aspect of our mind's ability, of our body's ability, of the human experience's ability. So ability is something you're born with. Skill is something you accumulate throughout life. You accumulate a skill, golf, your ability to pick something up, skill, ability, you do learn that or whatever, but it's something that seems a little bit more innate, right? Every human eventually learns how to grab something innately. So basically, where I'm going with all of this is that, yeah, skill is something that's accumulated. Some things we're born with, some things we have to, it's a finer motor skill. And so we need to learn that. This practice is a skill. It's something that, and the definition of skill is something that you can practice and improve. You can get better at it. If you can get better at it, then by definition, we can put it in the skill category. So I would put this practice as a type of skill that a person can develop to be present and to engage non-ordinary cognition. So with this practice, and let's just say a person arrives with space and self-awareness and they did it a different way. They didn't do the Qigong practice. That's okay. If a person can arrive in the moment with space in the mind, attention that's deliberate, similar effects will occur for both individuals, no matter how they got there, whether they got there through an Qigong system or whether they're a monk and got there with an incredible amount of force and trying to control. You know, the getting there may not have been the easiest, the most energy efficient dynamic, but arriving with a mind that has cognitive space and attention that is aware of self, that I'm just basically saying that other people can arrive there in different ways, right? The Qigong isn't the only way. So I'm saying that other people can arrive there. That is the introduction and the opportunity for a person with volition, intention, and will to engage non-ordinary cognition. If you are completely steeped in ordinary cognition, it's inaccessible. The reason it's inaccessible is because it requires the attention and clarity and space of mind to access it deliberately, intentionally, and willfully. And that's why dividing it into ordinary and non-ordinary cognition can be so beneficial, because you can easily evaluate, oh, well, I'm thinking about all of this shit. That's all ordinary cognition. You know, I'm worried about getting off work. I'm worried about what I'm going to have for dinner. I'm worried about, school that starts in 3 weeks and, all of these different things that I'm thinking about and worrying about. And where is everything else? Where is the exploration of the undiscovered? It doesn't exist. You're not doing it. You're not exploring it. You're just too busy in those same cycles and patterns and habits, and it's interference. It's not, we can't connect. We can't spread our wings and explore the depths of the human experience because we're too busy trying to make money, trying to impress people, or we're still just focusing on ourselves. We want to feel this emotion all the time, or yada, yada. We see this everywhere. So throughout my day, I am able to use the last 4 topics of the 20 topics to help build, establish, and set up non-ordinary cognition for the day. And it looks like hydrostasy. That's what I would call what I do with my mind in non-ordinary cognition. And so I can give an example of that. So I will say that I haven't explained all of this because it hasn't been appropriate. Even though I'm going through and I'm describing the 20 topics, sometimes going into depth isn't appropriate, such as hunting power. It wasn't appropriate necessarily to go into all of the techniques because the mind must have space. If the space isn't there, hunting power can actually be contraindicative. It can damage the overall practice and the momentum if a person isn't doing it correctly. And I'm not David Dorian Ross as far as this is concerned. There is a right way and a wrong way to do the hunting power practice. The wrong way leads to comparing, contrasting, and labeling and judging and getting down on yourself and trying to control and all of that. And we just don't have the energy for that. So I set up my practice with what I call the axis of hydrostasy. Now there's 2 different ways to look at the axis. One way is the axis of hydrostasy is what I'm typically doing, throughout the day. And then I have the alchemy aspect, which is what I do when I'm physically exerting myself, or if my body is starting to respond from too much or a lot of I wouldn't say too much, but a lot of physical activity. I will do the alchemy practice. So the alchemy will substitute this axis. And so those are my two different axes. I have multiple ones depending on the circumstance, but I'm going to default to the most natural. Not the most natural, the one that I'm doing most often. And these two create proprioception, a heightened sense of proprioception, a whole body awareness, and an expanded bubble of perception. And we start doing this on day one of Qigong. So the things that I talk about in hydrostasy as a practice, I do things that are outside of the practice that I'm sharing with you. But if I'm sharing it in the practice, it's because I've introduced things throughout the whole practice that will help lead up to this. So I'm not just leaving somebody on an island by themselves and saying, good luck. I have helped a person get to the point where this can be their axis of hydrostasy as well. I have what I call the convergence of breath. And we start developing the convergence of breath really right away, but I really start talking about it more in warrior training. Because warrior training will contain formal practices, and the convergence of breath requires a few formal practices. And then I'm going to put this as non-ordinary cognition. As my, and if you notice, I still have inside, outside, breath, and cognition. The four directions, they're still intact. When do we start learning about the four directions? Chapter 1 of Qigong Basic Alignment. We talk about the four directions. So by the time we get to hydrostasy, four directions is like, I get it. I need at least one of these four directions. Eventually we get into what I call differential rotation, multiple points of attention, and we can start to maintain all four directions simultaneously. So this is what I call the axis of hydrostasy. This is my practice. So if you were to drop out of the sky and say, Ernest, where is your mind? I may have something a little extra, because that non-ordinary cognition is a very wide thing that I can engage, and I'm going to show you what I do. So I'm just going to tell you exactly what I do with my mind throughout the day. So first, of course, I wake up, I do my highest vision, longest reach, deepest love. I do some formal practices. Typically, I'll have some coffee. When Shayna walks the dogs, I'll do my standing meditation, sitting meditation, my 4 modes practice in a formal setting as well as informal. So I'll do my formal 4 modes practice. When do you start learning about that? You really start learning about the formal 4 modes more so in warrior training, because that will have more formal practices. But I start talking about it in the first layer. So we warm up to it right away. Is everybody with me so far? So I have this axis of hydrostasy, which allows me to create my triangle. The triangle cannot be touched. I can't start it. I can't do any of it unless I have created space in the overall amount of thought and I am aware of myself. So basically those 4 things that I talked about with the first 3 layers, they have to be in place, right? Impeccable self-awareness. I have to have that balanced emotional state. The 4 things. So what is it? A balanced emotional state, a calm attitude, impeccable self-awareness, and a 4th one. Whatever that is, it'll come to me. But so the idea here is that throughout the day, and these are on my note cards and things like that to help remind me, what are my 4 directions? What am I doing? Where is my intention? And because I have space, I can start to build my triangle. Because deliberate modulation, sensing energy, and the active alignment are inaccessible in a mind that is steeped in ordinary cognition. Is this making sense? The way that I'm ordinary, non-ordinary, we should be able to, eventually we'll be able to quickly divert and see which one are we doing. And then you can evaluate quickly for yourself, is this where I want my mind to be? Or do I want it to be balanced with ordinary and non-ordinary? Here's a hint. Some of ordinary cognition can be below the level of recognition. So you can be in non-ordinary cognition while making a cup of coffee. The cup of coffee is ordinary cognition. That act of making the cup of coffee is ordinary. Where you have your mind while you do it could be non-ordinary, and they're working together. And then before you know it, you create a fabulous fucking cup of coffee. So because I create the space right away, and everything in the practice that I tell you guys, I do it myself. So I'm not, do as I say, but not as I do. I wake up. Even before I wake up, I'm in my dream state, preparing for the day. Where is my mind and did I put it there? And then I wake up, I go immediately into my practice. I make sure that I have whole body awareness and expanded bubble of perception. That creates an even stronger feeling of proprioception, my body in space and time, the convergences of breath. And I've talked about that in a previous class. And then some form of non-ordinary cognition. And this is the form of non-ordinary cognition that I personally choose. And it's one that I can share because I think it will be consistent. Meaning that I think that what I'm talking about is accessible to anybody who wants it and who does the practice or something
About
similar.
a balanced emotional state.
Yeah, I thought I said balanced emotional state. Maybe I did. And if I have my triangle in place, it creates an effect. Now, one of the effects that I haven't talked as much, well, actually, we've talked a ton about it, is the hydrostasy effect. So the hydrostasy effect is the result of this practice, and it becomes a feeling of balance. That's what this circle represents, is the feeling of balance. And so you no longer need anybody else to tell you about your shit because you know. You don't need anybody to tell you how much you should be doing something or how little you should be doing something, or you shouldn't eat meat, or you should eat meat, or you should exercise for this amount of time per day. That's one of the weird things that humans, and especially in the Western mind, we get into is this unbending desire. Yeah. Wait, unbending desire. Was that one of the four?
No.
No,
The
you were
common-
just saying,
Oh, go ahead.
Ernest was just saying, if you wanted to do it, or if he was making a comment, if this is something you want to do, and I just
Right.
added that.
Unbending, and yeah, I would say so. Yeah, that would be required. You can't come into hydrostasy with a half-ass attitude. It just can't. It won't work. Like it involves too much for a person to try to do it. And plus they can't unless the space has been created. So there is no hydrostasy until there is space and impeccable self-awareness. So this hydrostasy effect is something that now, Jerry, I would say this is a virtue. I would say this happens naturally as a result of the practice, that you begin to feel your own balance. Keep in mind the circle is moving along this axis, along the this line. So balance is always changing. But we can feel when we're on the fringes, we can feel when we've gone outside, and we can feel when we're cherry picking and we're choosing to exist in an extreme. Choosing to exist doesn't mean visiting. You can visit. I'm not your judge. Go visit extreme, say hello, remember your practice, stay close to center. Do your damn thing. But cherry picking is when we know damn well that we are existing in an extreme and yet we still choose to do it. That will actually amplify your suffering, just so you know. So the hydrostasy effect is a natural occurrence, and it was topic number 17. The act of alignment, which is the sixth pillar of the practice, is the result of this capstone. So I set up mine with the baseline of appreciation. And with appreciation, I set this up using death as my advisor. And I'm doing this with non-ordinary cognition. So I'm not thinking about it. Does that make sense? That's deliberate modulation. And you can create your own personal triangle as well. But this is the shared triangle that anybody who does this practice, they'll have an easier time finding these things because we've prepared for it. That's what the whole practice leads towards. So the appreciation is the appreciation for existence. And if that appreciation is held in your non-ordinary cognition long enough, you arrive at a place of contentment. Contentment is so fickle because so very few people display this quality. They really do. Contentment doesn't mean idle. Contentment doesn't mean that you're just at a standstill and you're not creating and you don't have goals and hopes and dreams and aspirations. It just means you can have all of that and still be okay with what is. You know how you hear all these things on the internet and it's like, just let go, and like, just basically that's the main one, is just let it go. All you need to do is let go of your dramas, let go of your, yes, there we go. Impeccable self-awareness, balanced emotional state, calm attitude, and a peaceful mind. Bingo. Those 4 are in place before hydrostasy begins, because of the first 3 layers, because we're doing those. Yes, perfect. I have them on a different note card, but currently my only 2 note cards are this one I don't really like. I'm working this out, but and this one, it just says Dongjing, which is understanding energy from Tai Chi. I'm trying to remember that one.
I just pulled the sticker off my mirror in my bathroom.
Soon these will have more acupuncture points and things like that as well. So become very personal. Those will be the sticky notes on my bathroom. Okay, so contentment is something that we don't talk a lot about, honestly, because most people aren't content with a damn thing. Contentment is a feeling. It's the balanced emotional state. When held long enough, you're okay with what is. You have let go, very likely. You're not thinking about all of the drama and the bullshit. You've let it go. It doesn't even come to mind anymore. So in this example, we have a person who, through appreciation and through non-ordinary cognition, has arrived at contentment. Contentment looks a lot like, hey, Ernest, do you want to go to the beach? Sure. Hey, Ernest, do you want to not go to the beach? Sure. I mean, I can. I don't have to. I'm okay. Do you want to go to this party tonight? I don't not want to go to the party tonight. Like, convince me. Why do I need to go? And then they convince me and I'm like, okay, I'll go to the party tonight. That's the type of, it doesn't mean that you never do anything or anything like that. So is this making sense so far? Contentment. Contentment is the word that I use for happiness, by the way. So if somebody were to drop out of the sky and say, Ernest, are you happy? If my triangle is in place, I'm happy. I'm content. I'm good. Like, you can give me $1 million or you could take $1 million away. I don't give a fuck because I'm good. No matter what. Doesn't that sound nice? Along with appreciation for life itself. And then that, when sustained, meaning that it has some continuity and some momentum, leads to a feeling. And I've called this different things before. I've called it the vacation feeling before. But really, the vacation feeling, if you break down what's occurring, it's the feeling of freedom. A person's mind and body and energy feels more free. They put themselves artificially, but it is still the result to a certain extent. Maybe depends. It's not a guaranteed result, but sometimes when people go on vacation, they put themselves in a different situation where they don't have to think about work. They put themselves in a different situation where they don't have to think about their day-to-day activities. They probably put themselves in a situation where they can have fun, where there's maybe a lot of nature, things to enjoy. That breaks the continuity of their everyday habitual streams and yada yada. And that continuity, the breaking of that continuity, will feel very similar to the freedom I'm talking about. Similar. The difference is the volition, the will, and the choice. Doing it on purpose and allowing that to gain momentum will feel different than I just took 3 hits of acid and I'm all one, man. Like, yeah, no shit. You just took 3 hits of acid. Like, you're feeling all one. And that's great. That can help a person to a certain extent, but that can get a little expensive if you start to rely on 3 hits of acid every day. And then not to mention tolerance, you'll have to go to exponentially, you'll have to increase it every day. And ask Timothy Leary, that's a difficult thing to do. You have to have an entire chemistry laboratory to your disposal. Yes, Jerry, question, please.
Who's Timothy Leary? Why does
He-
it sound familiar?
Timothy Leary is one of the people who did the Harvard LSD experiments. Ram Dass and the gang.
Oh,
Interestingly, most of them walked out of that experience different.
yeah. I just was going to comment that you've used the vacation feeling example so many times throughout the years, and I just, laying here, listening, and in that moment, I just thought, yeah, and that's what impeccable awareness starts to look at as well, where you're on that vacation, or maybe you just stepped outside and got on the beach, and you start reminding yourself of that, and that's where your awareness comes in, because you can easily direct yourself into, hey, now wait a minute, what did I instantly do with my mind when I got this vacation feeling? Because I can easily do that when I'm at home, in the kitchen, because that's what it is. It's a shift in how you're using your mind, how you're thinking, your appreciation level. And it's no different than doing that on your porch, on vacation, and you catch yourself doing it. And maybe you just politely remind yourself that there's no reason this feeling can't be recreated wherever I'm at.
And that is deliberate modulation.
That, yeah.
Yep. Bingo.
Right, but deliberate modulation, as Jerry described it, is exactly, you're doing it. I mean, I walk the beach every day, and I can easily, and I can observe myself and other people not doing it right there when there's a beautiful beach. It isn't the beach that brought me the feeling. It is the observing of it as something new, deliberately modulating to the feeling. There are plenty of people who have made walking the boardwalk a mission that they're not enjoying. They're looking to see who said hi and who didn't say hi. They're on the phone the whole time they're walking the boardwalk. They could be walking anywhere and not notice anything because they're fully self-absorbed in their cognition. So yeah, it's something you're doing when you're having the vacation feeling. That's deliberate modulation. You have to be doing it in order to have it, even on vacation.
Even on vacation. Yeah. So I'm going to walk to work today. I'll walk to work with the vacation feeling. If it were 20 degrees below zero with wind chill, I'm going to imagine myself, or I'm going to see myself as an explorer of the Arctic, and I will feel content. I will appreciate this opportunity to exist, and I can be in a blizzard or not in a blizzard and still feel free. Is my body going to be happy? No, maybe it's a little cold. Maybe I'm a little sniffly and miserable and shits in my eyes, but I still feel free. That's an interesting soup to swim in. And a lot of people just can't even fathom it because they're too bored. They're at odds with the moment. And that's another thing that we're talking about with ordinary and non-ordinary cognition, is the more that we're in ordinary cognition, the more we separate ourselves from the moment and everything that is accessible to us. We're not able to access these things because we're too deep in ordinary, everyday, trying to figure shit out, comparing, contrasting, trying to control, labeling, judging, beating ourselves up, creating the multiplicity of self, the better self, the higher self, the future self, the shadows. Trying to improve yourself is a form of focusing on yourself. If you do this practice, it's going to happen. Like you're going to self-improve. Like it is inevitable. Those are the things that I would call virtues. And so some of the things in this triangle I don't talk about because they're more virtuous. And this is something that I really put into place on purpose. And freedom, again, is the feeling to have or not have and still feel free. So I look at school. I'm about to do 130 hours for this doctorate program. And the anxious feeling that I feel is a habit, my body's habit of the unknown. So my mind doesn't go there, but I do feel the slight pull towards things are moving a little bit quicker because of an anticipated event that's going to happen in the future. Does that make sense? So I do feel the pull. I don't deny it. I don't indulge it. I acknowledge it, but I don't have to do anything with it. As long as I don't go too far into non-ordinary cognition, it won't lead to anxiety and things like that. It's just a little pull towards a little bit of nervous energy. And Sunday, before my first day of class, that will probably intensify a little bit. And 20 years from now, it may not exist at all. That's how this changes and moves over time. Does that make sense? And that also removes the deity effect. I just told you that I'm having, it's the habit of the emotion and I feel that pull. That's the hydrostasy effect. I can feel the pull of something pulling me away from my center. No, 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 back to my practice. I'm not going to pretend that that pull's not there though, because it is. It's pulling, it's there. It's a part of the, well, not right now, but it's a part, when it is, it's a part of the present moment. Freedom is the ability to have that small pull or not have that small pull and still feel your freedom, still feel your hydrostasy effect.
You don't have to try to let it go.
No, yeah, that's all just the way people talk about stuff.
I do try to transform it a little bit. I don't know if I try to transform it. I think we have a lot of other senses than the 5 that we name all the time.
Yes.
And my perceiving, intuiting something or perceiving something has other senses involved other than the 5. So sometimes when I feel the pull, it has a feeling of my heart beating faster. I have a different feeling in my stomach when I feel the excitement about something. And excitement can be negative or positive depending on what I do in my cognition about interpreting that. And if I don't have any real empirical evidence about what the pull is, I choose to not define it as nervousness. I choose to define it as excitement. And as long as it doesn't pull me too far out of balance, I can decide to interpret it as being looking forward to an unfolding of something new. And then I let that go. I try not to overthink it. But my tendency, my momentum and the habit in the past is when I get that feeling of my heart beating faster and that feeling in my stomach is doom or nervousness or problem to be solved that I need to correct because it's upsetting my calmness. And so I look to change my, and that could just be I'm intuiting something wonderful unfolding. So let's just put that aside for now and we'll see how it unfolds. But yeah, that's the one cognitive thing that I do to try to change. Why is my perception automatically I have to beware? No, I just have to heighten my level of awareness because I'm navigating something new, and that's exciting too. It doesn't have to be fearful. That's what the cautious in the fox walking is about, right? Is being hyper aware of your surroundings for the unfolding of whatever happens. I don't have to label it as negative or positive, but I could choose to look at it as a positive unfolding that I'm eager to observe and participate with.
Yeah, that makes sense. Jerry, did you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, I just briefly, you mentioned walking to work in the winter, and I thought about that a few weeks ago. I was just, I don't know, thinking about you. You know, that thing I do. I like to be in somebody else's space, and so you every day throughout the winter, you have about a mile, is it? And your winters there are so cold. And is it about a mile?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and every day you're not driving, you're out on the sidewalk
Not every
with
day.
a
'Cause I don't
view.
work every day, but
Oh,
yeah.
oh. But yeah, always throughout the whole winter, walking to work.
It's really the walk from work that gets you after you've worked all day, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. And then just a few pedestrians here and there,
It's
or a
Chicago,
lot.
there's pedestrians, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
I
feel
think
you.
a lot of people walk in the winter here.
There's always a lot of people. It's
Yeah, where we're at, it's pretty busy
Yeah. Yeah,
compared to other
storefront.
places, that is.
Yeah, I know those winters.
And I would say, in alignment with the discussion, the thing is I don't necessarily enjoy that walk home, right? Not, I mean, or the idea of it at least. But once I start walking, I can find enjoyment. Like I can find the freedom in the walk because I'm not in that ordinary complaining, poor me, I put myself there. I chose to walk. Like, so
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah,
You were right there. That's the point, you know? Yeah,
And so you can look at
absolutely.
you can look at this two different ways. In the past, when I was about to walk, maybe I needed to rule of three because I could see my mind going to self, I could see my mind going towards complaints, and I need to redirect that energy. Can't just let that continue because that's a form of passivity. That's kind of what Donna was talking about. I could choose to look at it a different way, right? That's counterbalance. I don't need to do that anymore. I mean, there may be an event where I do, so I always keep this in my toolbox. I'll rule of three quicker than quick if I need to. I'm not going to hesitate one iota because I understand I understand this practice and why it's so important. But now, because of the hydrostasy effect, I don't need to, the feeling is enough. And I don't need to label it good or bad or plus or minus. I don't need to do any of that. No thought is necessary. I can just redirect my cognition. I can just point the direction of my attention to 4 different directions at once. And that is doing something else. That's the mindfulness slider. I'm doing that so much that I don't have the energy or the cognitive ability to think a bunch of dumb shit about the scenario. Does that make sense? So after having built these, the capstone comes into place. And the capstone is the end of the practice, and it creates the 6th pillar. What's great about the capstone is it is both the 4th and the 5th pillar together. So I build on these. I still feel freedom, still feel contentment, still feel appreciation. And then I build on these. One is I feel the abstract quality. And it doesn't have to be an abstract quality. It can be the abstract quality. But it can also be an abstract quality. So there can be certain things that maybe you've discovered as a part of your island, and that's not necessarily shareable. We don't know. Like, not everything is going to be 100%, everybody can find this exact. I don't know. There's no real reason to believe that. The reason I can believe all of these is because of the development of the practice and the feedback that I get from people. I believe that all of these will be possible for a mind that is in the hydrostatic state of equilibrium. And I mean, just keep in mind, we're talking about the 20th top. We're at the end. So this does have some implication of a person practicing. But the abstract quality, and this is a funny one to label, so I'll just put oneness, but it's the feeling of we're all one, man. So kind of Donna was talking about how the ability to see all of the different aspects of the self, and not imagining a third person view necessarily, but still just seeing where these things are coming from. These are little aspects of the self. And all of these little aspects equal a totality. The totality includes the unknowable, which is fun and something that we cannot talk about at all. Not even a little bit. We can't even make art around the unknowable. So we have the known, the unknown, which we can make a lot of art, and that's what we're exploring with non-ordinary cognition, and then the unknowable. The unknowable is accepting the limits of the human being. And it's kind of getting away from the, I would say that the human being has the potential to access anything in the universe. But that could take time, that could take evolution, and we're not there right now. Like right now, I have no echolocation. That's not a sense, and I may never, human beings may never need to develop the sense of echolocation, but maybe we start to communicate telepathically because our minds are evolving, the cognition is evolving, and then before you know it, we're able to communicate with different forms, different means other than just words. All of that is a distinct possibility. Lots of possibility, actually, infinite, in fact. But so the capstone, I'm feeling it now. I feel it when I do classes. I feel it when I walk to work. I feel it when I'm at work. I feel it when someone's complaining about something stupid because they're entitled and they think everything in the world should be the way they think it should be. And I'm still feeling all of this. And then that leads to the 6th pillar. And if this is active, you are in a state of supreme adaptability. Keep in mind that if you're sensing the oneness, you are in that 5th pillar of sensing energy. You are sensing the moment if you're feeling that oneness and the abstract quality. Does that make sense? So those are you could say that these three are the fourth pillar, and you could say that these are a fun combination of the fourth and fifth. Because remember, it doesn't have to be the abstract quality, you can find a specific one. And now that's looking more like deliberate modulation. Whereas sensing into the oneness is always an exploration into the infinite. And that's always making yourself available to new things. And then that leads to, yes.
What was the top one again? The sixth one, I think you said.
The sixth
The
pillar
top.
is the active adaptation.
And you write that down somewhere there.
I can, yeah.
That very top little point is
It's what I'm calling the luminous effect.
Okay.
The luminous effect will put a person, if they're feeling that effect, into a place of supreme adaptation. Adaptation is no longer difficult. Or as difficult.
Yeah, would you mind just writing that down since you're labeling everything else there? And then I'm gonna keep it just for myself.
And you can keep it, but just remember that everything is subject to change. As new knowledge and descriptions increase, sometimes things, the way we word them and organize them, changes just a little bit. Such as the first three pillars. I still, from a philosophical standpoint, I can separate presence and mindfulness. These are two words that I don't even use anymore. So, but I could still talk about it this way. The only time I would really list these is if I was really trying to break down the system. Otherwise, none of this is necessary. Deliberate modulation, sensing energy. And eventually the active adaptation not only leads to evolution, it leads to conscious, deliberate, intentional evolution, to be specific. But now it's in the way of the convergence of breath. There we go.
Okay, I got cut off. And then you're gonna label that very top section of the pyramid where the sun is. That's
And
your
I'll go
adaptability or something.
the active adaptation. Or if we want to be a little bit more new agey, instead of the active adaptation, we can call that the evolution of consciousness. And then eventually it's a deliberate evolution of consciousness. Intention and attention is leading the organism where it wants to go. Which is because we're no longer just a product of our environment. Does this make sense? And if you are feeling this feeling that I call the luminous effect, I was calling it something different, but I like luminosity and luminosity that Donna mentioned. If you are feeling that, if you're in that state, you are supremely adaptable. You're going to move, you're going to change with change. And the reason is because in order to sense and to feel that luminous effect, it means that you are aligned to it. You are now going with the Tao rather than against it. You are in a complete state of non-interference. Energy is flowing through you and into the universe and from the universe with far less interruption. There could still be some biological interruption because we spent 30 or 40 years creating our situation just to uncreate it or whatever. But like, I still kind of feel that pull towards the unknown, that feeling, and that's okay, So it's never perfect or whatever, however a person wants to use that word. But if this pyramid is active, if we're in our hydrostasy practice, we're engaging non-ordinary cognition, and we're evolving the human mind. And we will continue to change over time, and we will continue to survive. It's that important to the human species that in some sense, we learn to get back to non-ordinary cognition. And I say get back to because I do believe the human species was knee deep in it at one point. Does that make sense? And then there's other topics. I think maybe one of the main topics that a part of hunting power is deliberate folly. And deliberate folly is a way to interact with other human beings, because it's impossible to not notice at a certain point that you're doing something fundamentally different with your existence than 99.99% of the people around you. That is just something you will feel. It's an anomaly. You have become an anomaly in the experiment. And that doesn't make you better. You're still prone to all of the different traps and everything else. We're still swimming in the same collective fifth destroyer of dysfunction. So let's not get to thinking that we're better than anybody or anything. But yeah.
There also is an effect.
Whoops. I meant to unmute myself. Sorry. Or I meant to mute myself and accidentally muted you. Sorry, Donna.
There's also an interaction that become the dynamic of interaction between the environment and you changes also depending on where you are on that slider, I find. And when I'm balanced, my interaction with nature changes and my interaction with human beings change. Even when I am not choosing to engage in deliberate folly, although you have to sometimes just to not be a freakish human being. You know, because people expect a certain level of societal interaction when there's people around, and if you're totally removed from it, it is really odd for them. But I notice that birds and animals, they really pick up on when I'm more balanced in the slider and I'm doing that thing, animals respond completely differently to me, even with subtle changes on where I am in the slider. Like if I am more absorbed in cognition, or I'm, you know, if I'm to the left of the slider, I have far less interaction with animal life. They do not engage me. They disperse, you know, like birds fly away and things that normally happen when you walk by animals. When I am in much more balance, I get so close. Animals get so close to me, and I get so wildlife get so close to them. It's my recognition of it sometimes scares them away because I can't believe how that changes. That's a really observable thing to me now more than ever.
Yeah. That can be one of the areas you explore, you know, the connection between human beings and nature and stuff like that. So that's one of the great things about this, is that it will equal a type of uniqueness, maybe even a source of authenticity where desire and intelligence are overlapping. And deliberate folly does have, I do have technique, because if there's no technique, it's not a deliverable thing. It's just talking shit, right? So I do have technique with deliberate folly. There's very specific technique, and it actually relates to push hands. But I don't like the way, the way that they organize push hands. So I'm going to change it a little bit for.
Would you give me, this is, and we don't have to go down a rabbit hole here. You're doing a different class today, but that term has came up a lot over the years, and I've just never understood what the problem is with it. Why is interacting with human beings somehow out of my present moment? I've just never understood the problem with it. I don't get it.
It's not outside of your present moment. It's the difference between ordinary and non-ordinary cognition, what people are mostly doing with themselves. If I'm at the clinic, chances are there are people who are bored, they're at odds, they're trying to figure things out, they're subtly attempting to manipulate and control. These are just natural, these are things that people are doing as a result of the leaf at the mercy of the mind being a leaf at the mercy of the wind. And if you are not deliberately following, it can be very easy to align to that.
Oh, okay. Then maybe give me, you're defining it. Okay. I don't,
Let's
would
say
you
we're
give me an
sitting,
example?
let's say we're sitting in a room, this room, and who's not here? Michael. Let's say all of you guys are talking about Michael. You're just talking shit. You know, how often do people talk shit, Jerry? Every single day. It's ordinary cognition to compare, to contrast, to try to control, to attempt to manipulate, to do all of these things, to focus on self. This is occurring in the common mind. Just a common thing. It's happening. The human being's tendency to be self-centered is enormous. You know, that's the reason we're living in the world we're living in. And
Okay.
that's why every
Yeah.
economics model requires it. You can't create a model of the human species and expect it to be anything close to accurate if you don't account for the human being's tendency to run out and buy up all the toilet paper, for example. So in an example that I'm giving you, everybody here is talking shit about another human being. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to participate in that one iota. I don't care who it is, what they're talking about. I'm not into that. I don't do that. That's not something that I find beneficial. It takes me away from my hydrostasy circle. But at the same time, I'm not going to say, fuck all you guys talking shit about people. I'm going to go over here in the corner and be perfect. Because that's how people.
That's your deliberate folly. I
No,
don't
it's
get
not.
it.
No, that is
All
not
right.
my favorite folly. That is
What
what.
is deliberate folly? You got three people standing by the water cooler. They're
Yeah.
grabbing their paper cups. You got your mug, and they're talking about Bob, and they're just like, Jesus, man, every goddamn Monday morning, what is up with this guy? Whatever, or whatever his name is. And you walk over. What's your deliberate folly? I'm
Well,
being sincere. What is it?
first of all, it's technique driven. So the first thing is to connect. Connection begins with attention. So if two attentions cross paths, you have connected. And then once connection, you can join the conversation or not join the conversation. Once you join, you can follow the conversation, which means active listening, not trying to control the setting. So typically when I'm talking to somebody, I'm doing deliberate folly. I'm actively listening. I'm not trying to control. I'm not trying to convince. I am asking follow-up questions because that's a part of the following. So I take some of the things that are in push hands, which is physical interaction with other human beings in Tai Chi, and I make it psychological interaction. I take the same principles and I apply it psychologically, the same physically. I'm not trying to control it. So let's say, how often have you been involved in a conversation? And if you're really honest with yourself and observe this throughout the day, almost all of your conversations are going to contain some of this, but people are trying to convince you of something. People are trying to tell you limited beliefs as if they were true and absolute for the human species. Everybody has to suffer. Everybody is going to get angry every day. Everybody is going to create severe psychological suffering until the day they die. If these are conversations and people talk about other people, if you walk past a group of people and they're talking and you listen in, chances are they're talking about the person that's not there, or they're talking about it's like I was watching this thing on YouTube or Facebook, and very rarely do I find anything on. And absolutely, Lauren, without judgment, because judgment is a stream of thought on my part about them. That doesn't occur because I'm doing my practice. So I'm able to interact with people who aren't necessarily practicing, who aren't necessarily doing things that I want to do. And I'm able to interact with them in a way that doesn't alienate them and myself. So I'm still able to have conversations. I'm still able to connect with people. What I would do in that situation where people are talking shit, I'll redirect. That's a part of that method is rather than declaring war or trying to make my point, let me make my point so I can change your mind. And before you know it, it's a very passive form of arguing. And they're going to say, no, we're just debating. We're just stop. You're trying to convince somebody of something else, which is the reason you're flapping your gums in the first place. So deliberate folly is a way to interact with other humans.
You would never say that to them. I mean, you're in a spa, Shen. You would never say that to people. What
No.
you just said, because it sounded really. What's
No.
wrong with that? That's impeccable awareness.
But you will be labeled, and so you really need to do this. When you engage in the practice, and
I'm not suggesting to do it. I'm just saying, given where you're at and who you are, and I'm sure you've engaged with them enough that they know what earnest is about. So I'm thinking I wouldn't be offended by that if you walked up and you just said, just kind of lightly, kind of politically okay, just threw a little bit of that
Why?
awareness out
Why
there.
would I do that?
Well, you just said it here, so you must have been feeling it.
But it
You
doesn't
just
matter.
said it there.
But I'm not trying to, it's non-interference. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. If you think Donald Trump is the worst human being on earth, I'm not going to try to convince you otherwise. It's not my place. So I wouldn't give you my
So
political
this
view.
is your definition of deliberate folly is the interaction with human beings that may be, because here we're not probably doing that because we're all here by consensus, topic wise, word wise. But you're just saying when you're out in public, out in the island of the practical, you're running into space where, there's just kind of energy coming your way and you got to mind your boundaries. Where's your mind? This is all deliberate folly, just where
Yeah,
you're kind of navigating
it's a
the
way.
stuff.
It's a way to
That's why you call it folly.
exactly because the world
Okay.
is insane. And in order to interact with an insane world, you need to be hyper aware of your place in space and time, of your own mind. So really, if you wanted to define deliberate folly, it's a way to interact with ordinary cognition, with a combination of ordinary and non-ordinary cognition. You're not meeting ordinary with ordinary because you're going to end up just talking about dumb shit. Or you're going to end up doing dumb shit or partaking in dumb shit. But deliberate folly will interject non-ordinary with ordinary. So every time you interact with a human being, you're not trying to manipulate, you're not trying to convince, you're not trying to control, and ultimately you're not trying to interfere. So if Ida comes up to me and she's like, I just had the worst experience ever, I'm not going to say I'm sorry. I'm not going to say poor you. I'm not going to say I wish that didn't happen. I might ask if you need anything, like, is there anything I can do? Otherwise, I'm just going to keep my place. My place isn't to fix Ida. My place isn't to tell her everything is going to be all right. That's all ordinary cognition. And if I wanted to deliberate folly, I'll find a way to interact with Ida about the situation that doesn't alienate her or me. Because sometimes when you do that, people start to label you, judge you, and you're right. Oh, well, I'm right. Well, the thought that I just had was right, that I can't control what other people are thinking, but at the same time, I can find a way to interact that's more cohesive. And
redirect.
redirect when necessary.
So you can show that you're listening by saying, I can see how that would be upsetting. I can see how that would be upsetting to you. I get upset when I allow, somebody else to affect me in that kind of way. Those are lovely earrings you have on right now.
Bingo.
Or I whatever.
Gently steering conversation away
I
from
miss, all I know is I miss your smile because I know when you're smiling that you feel good and I like to see you feeling good. Whatever, I don't know. It's just, that's push hands to me.
yes.
It happens organically in the moment. There's no set answer. Although they do teach the skill of that in when you're becoming a therapist or when you're when you're a nurse, they teach you ways to reflect back, and there are techniques that you can learn, but a lot of it occurs organically in the moment where you're not interfering in trying to change the behavior. You're not participating in the extreme of the behavior. You're not validating the extreme of the behavior, but you're validating the person. And that their perception feels real to them.
Yes.
And you can understand why, because
Yeah.
you can see the momentum of how they got there. So, and that you've done some version of that yourself. So that's push hands. To me, that's push hands.
That's exactly what it is. If we want to call deliberate folly cognitive push hands, that's a perfect way to put it. Because we connect, we join, we adhere, we redirect when necessary, but we're not trying to lead. We're not trying to control. We're not trying to convince. We're not trying to manipulate. And I can promise you that almost all conversations are doing some of that.
And I found that if you're put on the spot about somebody asking you, well, what do you think about this person that we're talking shit about? Or what do you think? All I can do is say, well, what I usually do when I feel like that extreme in a certain situation is and whatever it is I choose to do to find my balance. Because to move forward effectively with adaptation, I have techniques to do that. So without going into the whole practice, I'll just say this is the way I, you know, choose to respond in those situations if I can.
Yeah. The opposite of this is speaking your truth or whatever. It's basically your opportunity to be an asshole. So if somebody is talking about something and then I say, well, that's ordinary cognition. I have no intentions of discussing people when they're not here. That's not going to go over well with the group. Like they're going to look at me like I'm an oddball and an alien, and I'm probably going to be okay with that because of my practice, but that does no good in terms of communicating, collaborating, and being available for people. Now, if they ask a question, I do sometimes give people the opportunity. What kind of answer do you want? I've had people say, Ernest, how are you today? And I'm like, well, what kind of answer do you want? Do you want the quick answer that everybody says that we're not really interested? Or do you want me to really tell you how I feel and what's going on? People that get to know me, they're like, never mind, you're good. I don't want to get into it, right? What people do is they're constantly in conversations just trying to interject their own mind. It's not listening, it's not following, it's not validating. It's trying to change, it's trying to argue, it's trying to compete, or you're constantly interjecting I. And those are the conversations where I start talking to Donna about my love seat. Before you know it, we're talking about her love seat. How did that happen? Do you see what I mean? And then also
I
because
say that sometimes in family functions. Like
Mhm.
it's like I usually get up from the table when it becomes that, because somebody will ask a question or pose a view, and then everybody's doing their thing, and we all talk over each other, and we don't take it offense in it, but it's not very productive. And I will say, are you listening to me, or you're just waiting for my mouth to stop moving because you know it's socially appropriate to wait until my mouth stops moving so you can tell me what your opinion is? Are you even listening to mine? Because otherwise this isn't a discussion anymore.
I love everything you just said, Donna, and here's why it's wrong. And then we'll go into that. So deliberate folly is a way to interact with other human beings who are completely steeped in ordinary cognition. You aren't. So you have to have some technique to keep one foot at least in your non-ordinary cognition so you don't get swept away with talking dumb shit about dumb shit. And if they ask me in a certain way, sometimes I will go ahead and say, well, you asked. So everything you're talking about in terms of politics is a ridiculous cycle that has been going on for the last 10,000 years. And it's not capitalism that's at fault. It's you. It's every single human being that is self-centered, that only cares about themselves, is the reason that capitalism is failing, not capitalism itself. On one hand, you say that you don't like capitalism, but on the other hand, if I gave you $1 billion fucking dollars, you're going to take every penny and run. That's a contradiction. And if I say that, oh God, that's not going to go over well. That's not how to manage life with other human beings. So deliberate folly is a way for a person in warrior training to stay in non-ordinary and ordinary cognition while interacting with another human being with the principles of non-interference. I don't want to change your mind. I don't want to try to control you, because as much as somebody says, oh, Donna, your feelings are totally valid and here's why they're all wrong. What? You just
Oh,
said
you were joking when you said that.
I was joking when I said that. Yeah,
Okay, because I'm listening. I'm thinking,
that
is
was
he
a joke.
reacting to her? Was that a joke? And I was trying to
It's a joke.
follow what the point was. Okay.
Of course that's a joke. Yeah.
But okay, so you weren't really commenting on when she said, are you really listening to me? You
No,
just
he was responding as the person that I was talking to.
yeah, that's
Oh,
Here's
okay.
here's everything you just said, and now let me tell you why you're wrong. Yes, they were just waiting for my mouth to
yes.
stop moving so
Oh,
they
okay.
could
Well,
tell me
yeah.
that I was wrong.
And
Yeah.
sometimes
And
it's
that is
veiled.
how ordinary mind, thinks. They're listening to respond, not listening to understand.
And
And you know what? My
Big mind.
family, just as a side note, my family is not totally like that. It's just that there's a certain thing that happens that I'm sure everyone's aware of in a family dynamic. I have older brothers and I am the little sister. So somehow we seem to, and my older brother's children are grown people with really great minds and they're great hearts, but everybody seems to fall into the roles that we have a lot of momentum and habit going with. So it turns into, I'm just waiting for her mouth to stop moving because she's just a little sister, and what does she know? I'm the authority here. And they don't really mean it, but it does happen. And then so we tend to remind each other of
Well, I bet you and Jean being there, I bet you and
uh,
Jean have changed this dynamic quite lovingly. Just your energy.
oh, my
I mean,
brother, here's an example. My brother Gene will say to me, I'll go, oh yeah, they're both purple. And he goes, that's not purple, it's blue. This is blue. I don't know, it's purple. It's got more red in it. And so we're having a ridiculous argument about what color this is. And so I'm going to show him what purple is. So I go around the house and Barbara goes, if you're looking for purple, something purple, you're not going to find it because I hate the color purple. And then I find markers for the grandchildren and there's a purple marker. So I bring it in and I hold up the color next to him. And he goes, oh, but this went on for 20 minutes. It wasn't the minute that it's taking me to tell you. And Barbara goes, why do you have to be right so much? I go, oh, I don't have to be right all the time, just with him. Because it's that sister thing. He's busting my chops so that I'll run around like an idiot. Look, he feels good about puppeteering me running around like an idiot. And I run around like an idiot because I want him to admit that he's wrong and his little sister is right. And we both know the dynamic that's going on, but somehow we still do it just because it's deliberate folly. It's just fun.
yeah, it sounds lovely. You know,
Well,
I mean, really, that is your moment right there. Are you going to hang with him in fun? Or, I mean, really, that is our present moment right there. So pick and choose how you want to do it. I mean, sounds lovely.
It's ridiculous. It's when he was 15 and I was born. Like when I was little and he was old enough to know better than to torture me. He just likes to torture me because I'm the little sister and that's what we do. So sometimes even our intelligent conversations resort to that. And I'll take it to the nth degree and he'll take it to the nth degree. And then it frustrates other people because Barbara doesn't argue or confront and she doesn't like that. But we do it to the end because we're ridiculous Sicilians.
I think it has more to do with the momentum of habit than
It does, but whatever.
Sounds like
It's
deliberate
fun.
choice.
It's fun.
so the key thing to keep in mind is that if you're not doing this practice and you're not happenstance, it's not always happenstance. People know how to put themselves into non-ordinary cognition, but not on a total scale. But if a person isn't in non-ordinary cognition, or they're not accessing that in the moment, there is a disparity. If you're doing it, nobody else is. So that is an obvious anomaly. We used to talk about consistencies and anomalies, and I still do. I still look at things that way. It's easy to see it that way. So you have just become the anomaly, and the speech is going to follow the thought. And if the thought of 99% of people is dysfunctional, not necessarily talking shit or bad, but it is dysfunctional. It's trying to control, trying to manipulate, trying to figure things out, trying to get where they want to go by thinking about themselves and others. And it's usually repetitive, habitual, eventually won't make the words that people talk are going to be a direct reflection of the thoughts that they think. So if most of the shit that we talk about is going to be so into ordinary cognition that it's just, there's very little for us to really get from that. Does that make sense? And so deliberate folly is just a way to interact with people who are not practicing, and so that you can be more cohesive with them. And ultimately, you're not going to try to control them. You're not going to try to manipulate them. And non-interference, you can really explore and see how far that goes. But it also includes if somebody says, I had a friend years ago now, but they got divorced. And I didn't tell them I'm sorry. And they appreciated that. They're like, you're the only one who didn't give me a pity party. And I'm like, why would I do that? This could be the most important, beneficial thing to ever happen in your life. And it feels shitty right now, but it could be great. Then again, you could have just made the worst decision of your life and you're going to have an opportunity to learn from that. I don't know. I'm not here to control you or tell you what's good for you. I'm not your healer. I'm not your guru. I'm not your better. I don't know shit about your life. Like, and what
And
I,
maybe the path that they traveled for the time that they chose to travel it together was glorious, and it just isn't anymore. And so there's no pity to be had.
yeah, yeah. And it's also, and that's just leaking
I
power.
mean, you are having some nice conversations once in a while, aren't you?
I have,
mean,
I have nice conversations. Yeah.
yeah, okay. I hope we're not declaring war on conversations with people because it's
No,
it's
no,
just
this
such
is
a lovely part of the
it's a,
moment when it happens.
yeah, but, and maybe this
Let
is,
me give an example. Let me give an example. I'm not out. I'm not working. So this cooler talk and all this stuff you're talking about, I'm not around it because I'm not working anymore. I'm out here in my little, acreage. So I'm not having a lot of this interaction you're talking about. So I'm having a lot of deliberate conversations depending on who I choose to hang out with. But we're in town yesterday and we wanted to stop at the nursery that we've been driving by. It's a new one. There's nobody there but us. We just had an awesome 30-minute chat about plants and how ugly 603 is in town, with this new guy. It was just lovely.
mm,
And of course, I'm mindful of how I'm responding, my transparency. Am I trying to control? Am I allowing all of us to have our thoughts shared? And, there's absolutely deliberate conversation, but it was just lovely. We were there for at least 30 minutes. Awesome.
I have no, yeah, I have no qualms with the human being's
Yeah.
desire,
I mean, yeah.
but what I have developed is a system to make sure that a person doesn't get swept into non-ordinary cognition because of everybody else. It's called rhythmic entrainment. It's called mob mentality. A human being is more likely to adopt the pace of everybody else around them. Shayna, I pointed this out to her when we walk. It's really easy to catch the city pace if you're not being deliberate with your own mind. You just end up walking fast for no fucking reason and you don't even know why. So I've developed it for myself, first of all, and then of course it will be beneficial to others who do it, but I developed deliberate folly for myself because I can't help but notice how people interact with you if you're completely in non-ordinary cognition while they're, completely in ordinary. Uh it's incongruent in a way. But yeah, no, I have fine
Yeah.
conversation.
That doesn't sound adaptable to me.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I think we can be adaptable. Yeah.
That's the key. That's the point. And adaptable while not trying to manipulate and control, which is the most popular thing that people do in conversations. It is, and then the more you do this practice, the more you feel the subtle attempts that people try to manipulate you. They're trying to kind of gradually pull your thoughts and cognition in a direction that they can manipulate a little bit more and more and more and more. And then before you know it, they're like, see, told you so. You think the way that I think now, right? And that's all. It's a form of assimilation. And um it's happening below the threshold of recognition in almost every conversation. Also, what is, and you have to really start to observe, and the observation has to be there without the judgment and the thought. So that is another hydrostasy thing. But you can really see how much people are projecting in conversations. They don't want to project anything that would give you a negative light of them. So when people talk, they're only going to give you what puts them usually. Again, you can find these rare conversations where you talk to somebody and they tell you how they were an asshat last week. Yada, that's not common. Commonly, people are just going to project the image of themselves that they want you to view. They want you to view them that way. So they project the image of how they want to view themselves. Does that make sense? And that's what a lot of conversation is. It's a lot of projection.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to go down a rabbit hole or anything, but I'm just politely just, I don't know. I'm just not hanging out in those places. So maybe you in the city, you're walking along, somebody's standing there by the trash can or they're picking up a newspaper. I don't know who you're talking to, but I just don't feel all this paranoia.
It's not
You know, I
paranoia.
had a beautiful conversation with the burlap lady too, as well. I mean, just
You can have beautiful conversations with anybody. It doesn't matter, but that's
yeah, yeah. I don't feel the paranoia that you're talking about when I'm there, but
not the
I'm
right.
sure I've been around. Go ahead.
I'm just going to tell you, paranoia is not the correct word. It's
Well,
not.
whatever it is, you feel like people are always trying to manipulate you. I don't feel that. Or maybe I just redirect. I don't know.
Well,
I
then
think,
yeah.
I think
The
like when
burlap
you're
lady
waiting
wasn't trying to.
online in Starbucks or Walmart or wherever, and it's a long line and the cashier is having difficulty or the person is taking a long time, 3 or 4 people will either say something out loud or display some frustration with the person online, and so the deliberate folly comes in if you choose to, if somebody engages you and wants to pull you in the direction of I'm dissatisfied, or this store sucks, or every line I get on is the bad line, or whatever. I don't even, it
Yeah,
doesn't even have to be negative. It could be I'm great every line, it could be whatever. It's just when the engagement is something that you can feel a pull away from balance, but you do not want to ignore the person and be an asshole or say to them, shut up, you're ruining my peace. Um, to engage with them in some way that validates the human being, but doesn't invalidate
yeah. Yeah,
what
now
they're
that I
saying.
understand the term deliberate folly, I
Right.
can
So it's not
deliberate folly my
paranoia.
day.
Paranoia at all. No, it's an
No, he was
understanding
just talking
of the
about,
condition.
when somebody's trying to manipulate you.
You
And I'm
can,
just was
yeah.
politely saying I don't feel that a lot in conversations. Maybe I'd redirect. Maybe I interject something that lightens the topic. I don't know. I just don't feel like this
Sure,
person's
but if the
trying to
people
manipulate me.
complaining to you saying, doesn't this suck? This is ridiculous. This is a terrible story. They want validation. They want you to agree with them. That's all
Right.
they
And then
want
in
from
that
you, is
moment,
for you
I
to
have a
agree.
deliberate choice. I have a deliberate choice what I'm going to do with my mind.
Fine.
Sure,
And so I'll just
absolutely.
react the way I choose.
That's
Yeah.
deliberate folly.
That's exactly
Yeah.
what he's saying. But the effort on their part is to manipulate you into agreeing with them and
I'm not
validating
interested in
their.
I'm not interested in what they're doing. I'm interested in my garden and what I'm choosing. So
Exactly.
yes,
That's
I'm
why
having
it's
a lot
not.
of
That's why it's
positive deliberate folly out there. Tons of
exactly. That's why it's not
yeah,
It's there.
paranoia.
Right. That's why it's not
yeah,
because
You're
and
both
then
saying the same.
yeah,
yeah,
but I think the word manipulate is the word that's sticking out in your mind. And I don't
yeah.
think you know how subtle manipulation can be.
Oh, I do. I feel it. I just
Well then
deliberate.
if you do and if you feel it, you will know that it's a part of almost every conversation. And then we wouldn't
I
really
just
be talking.
deliberate folly around it. I just choose where I'm going to go
But you just said that a lot of your conversations don't have that manipulation factor, and
because I'm not going to go into it. I'm not going to go into
but
it.
the factor is still there. If you don't go into it, that is
Okay.
your deliberate folly, but that doesn't mean that the factor wasn't
Yeah.
there. And if a person's not practiced, very likely they're going to allow that factor to displace their practice, which is the reason that
Yeah.
deliberate folly is there, because we have 4
Yeah.
destroyers, one of 5 primary destroyers. One of them is social. And so the social ability to connect and the social ability to communicate, all of these things will come crashing down on a person in this practice because they'll see how uh,
Yeah, your office environment, it's got to be, I totally get it. You're
our
in
office
with these
environment is
I
people
think
every day.
he's just
Or,
using extreme examples to make the
yeah,
point more obvious. I don't think that's what he's
well,
yeah,
saying is.
I could use far less extreme examples. So let's say that we're just having a conversation and you start telling me about how much you used to be able to bench press or how many attractive people you used to be able to woo, or you
I
just
can't relate to none of this. It's not, we can move on. I can't even relate to that. I don't even talk to people. I never have
you
conversations like
you
that.
also
I
started
just can't relate.
you're on an island
I
by
never
yourself.
walked up to somebody that says, "Oh my gosh," I don't know.
Yeah, I'm looking more at the subtleties of the conversation, not necessarily, people don't generally just walk up and start talking shit, but it's a part of the conversation because it's a part of the mind. The mind is projecting, therefore, the vast majority of what people are talking about is just a projection, and the bottom line is it's ordinary cognition. It's not exploring the infinite when we're doing that. because it involves words, it involves thought. So it is a form of ordinary cognition. And as a practitioner, we want to maintain a balance between ordinary and non-ordinary, and deliberate folly will help a person do that. And that's the point of it.
Thank you for taking these moments. But like I said, I wasn't looking to go down a rabbit hole. I may have started to do that. We can move on.
Yeah, I think that the more that people practice, especially in hydrostasy, they will find deliberate folly very beneficial for, actually even before that, because it's the best way to listen. It's the best way to have active conversations where you're not just trying to. Yeah, I think really paying attention to the dynamics of conversation, some of this may come to light. I call it conversational ping pong. Yes. A lot of conversation is just conversational ping pong. You'll say something about yourself, they'll say something about themselves, and back and forth and back and forth. And if that's a beautiful conversation, then that's a beautiful conversation. But it's also ordinary cognition, and it's a lot of the same old, same old. Which
But
is,
you gotta start somewhere. And I just don't want to be going throughout my day. It feels in this moment like some sort of judgment. I mean, I just ran into you. I had people come up to me, just in Walmart. I'm just picking up some gardening stuff. They'll walk right up and it's like they know me or something, and it's like, yeah, I can walk in that door. I can smile and yeah, I love those plants too, I don't have to be wondering if it's ordinary or not. I mean, I just don't go that deep with it. I just don't. I have a nice moment. I just enjoy nice moments.
okay. Yeah. But yeah, so deliberate folly is not judgment, because judgment requires words. Deliberate folly is the recognition of a simple dynamic between ordinary and non-ordinary cognition. And it's also recognizing the simple dynamic that what people talk about is what people think about. You're just thinking out loud, and you call it a conversation. And most of it is going to be steeped in ordinary cognition. What are people thinking about? It's the same thing. What is warrior training? Warrior training covers the areas of cognition that people visit the most, in addition to repetitive, habitual, and not making them feel well. You think this conversation is original? No, they've talked to the last 15 people that they've met about the same shit. It's a repetitive pattern. And it's okay. I don't have to declare war on it, but I'm not going to totally immerse myself in it. I'll make sure that my practice is in place simultaneously, like we're doing right now. I mean, I'm giving an example of deliberate folly.
Were you going to talk about what you do with non-ordinary cognition, or that wasn't where you were headed?
Yeah, no, I don't, when we talk about, I think that is a form of ordinary, is what do we do with? That's kind of an ordinary sentence, right? What do we do with? What do we do with this cup? What do we do with this thought? You don't do anything with non-ordinary cognition other than swim in it and allow it to develop your consciousness. And what you do is you find, it's like it's a method of exploration. You're finding new feelings in the infinite. You're learning more about yourself. And when I say yourself, I mean your environment. I mean the other person as a part of yourself. All of these different things. So in non-ordinary cognition, it is the exploration of the human experience beyond just thought, beyond just our concepts, which any conversation is going to rely on those two things, thoughts and concepts. And while I don't declare war on them, I need to make sure that whenever thoughts and concepts are occurring, I'm also doing my practice. And that is what deliberate folly is. And people love to talk. So yeah, at a certain point, you just have to be like, enough. You have said enough. But then you really start to see that you really have to observe this. Like if I'm saying this and you're not seeing it, it's not going to make any sense. But why do you think distraction is the first enemy of knowledge? And how much do you think this conversation is coming from the destroyers? How much is this conversation coming from the enemies of knowledge? It's a distraction. A lot of people talk because they just can't sit. They have no concept of comfortable silence. They have no idea that I can actually be entertained by the infinite dimension of the cosmos. No, I have to have my cell phone. I have to talk. I have to do something. I have to always be doing something. I can never just sit on the curb and feel contentment. Because if we did, we would all be talking much less. We would only be talking to communicate. And that's not typically what people are doing with their words. They're doing the same thing they do
Well,
with their
yeah, you're saying you're talking from memory. You've been around this, but you're not suggesting that your day is kind of having a lot of this happen, is it? I mean, Shen's pretty
well, it's
zen in
interaction.
there,
It's
you
interaction.
know.
No, I do deliberate folly with everybody, Jerry. You right now, I'm using deliberate folly because we're
Yes.
using words, we're using concepts. This is thought. We're thinking right now, you and I.
Well, we're trying to communicate. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm just
Yeah,
trying to communicate.
but we're thinking and we're using concepts and we're using words. That's not the gap.
Well, I get it. I'm just trying to, I guess I'm trying to understand because
And that's
what
not
you're talking about, I can't relate to because I'm not hanging out there. And I'm thinking, I feel like I know you pretty well. Been hanging with you for 5 years. Everybody in here, I don't think you're hanging out in these spaces all day. I don't. Would you?
everybody,
I mean,
we're all hanging out in these spaces all day because 99 point, if you're doing this practice, because the vast majority of people aren't. So yes, I'm in this space all the time with
And
every
that's where it becomes more observable
because you're
because
walking
you
on the
are
street, you're in
practicing.
the office. Is
bingo.
that what you mean?
Bingo, Donna. Because I am in a state of non-ordinary cognition, I can observe more without judgment. I can see. And that's why I use the word seeing. And in every conversation, I am using, if I talk to Shayna, I am using deliberate folly to some extent because it is the most efficient way of interacting with another human being while keeping non-interference and the principles of balance and everything else in mind and in play.
Yeah, but on your walk home, you may or may not interact with anybody in that hour or that mile walk. And when you're down on the water, you're walking the dogs, you might not be running into anybody.
And then the way that you learn deliberate folly with others is deliberate folly with self. And so if I'm not deliberate folly with someone else, I'm deliberately folly with myself and my environment. Because if you were paying attention, like really hearing the mechanism of this, connect, join, adhere, these are the techniques. What do I do? Well, connection is a result of attention. When two forms of, this is one form, but when two beams of attention, when light of attention crosses, you have connection. But from that connection, we have to join the conversation. We have to adhere to what they're doing, follow. So these are the push hands that Donna and I were talking about. That's how I interact with other people.
Easy, easy,
Very easy. Yes. And then
easy peasy.
why is it easy? Because I practice it with myself.
Yeah. Yep.
And so every single conversation, as long as I'm doing my practice, will include deliberate folly, including this one. Any conversation that you've had with me hopefully involved deliberate folly. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Active listening, boundaries.
Actively
Donna gave awesome examples of
not trying to
talking
manipulate
about Ida. You know, if Ida
and
wasn't feeling good.
not projecting your sense of
Yeah.
self. That's
Not
important.
having to own everything. It's all about you. No.
And very, very few conversations between human beings will follow this dynamic. If you really watch what's going on, you can really see that there is this constant tussle.
Yeah, and like Donna
Whether it's
said,
with
you know,
themselves
you can
or-
tell when somebody's they're not even there. Yeah,
Oh,
you know, but again, it's like you said. Yeah, I think I understand deliberate folly. It's all going to be choice. I agree with Lauren on that. Absolutely, it's all choice. All deliberate folly. Got
and
it.
it's all deliberate folly, yes. And then the thing about choice is that if we're not accessing the infinite, it's not really choice. If you're at a stoplight, you're not choosing a damn thing. If it's just plus or minus, left or right, that's just a basic decision. And this could look like semantics, but I use these words very deliberately on purpose because choice means that you're reaching into the infinite and you're finding what is most appropriate for you in that moment, and you're plucking it from. You can't pluck something from the infinite if you're not accessing the infinite. If you're in ordinary cognition, you've thought these thoughts before, you've talked this talk before, you've done this.
It's just default. You're a leaf at the
It's
mercy
just
of the
default. It's
wind.
just the same old shit. And since most people are in default, leaf at the mercy of the wind, so is their conversation. So is the trajectory of their attention and their mind is going to very likely violate every single one of the warrior training principles. How can I maintain my warrior training principles while violating my warrior training principles in conversations with other people? That doesn't make sense. So deliberate folly helps you maintain, and that's why it's delivered in, we begin it in warrior training, but we really drive it home in hydrostasy. But we start touching on the elements of it very early on. Just like with appreciation, contentment, and freedom, we start touching those things very early on. And trust me, it doesn't matter how you present yourself. People will judge you how they want to judge you, and there's nothing you can do about that. Because it's all projection / reflection. A reflection of their own projection is what they're seeing. They're not actually seeing you. But that's common. That's what most people are doing with their entire life experience, is projecting and reflecting. They're not really exploring. And that is the thesis. That's the reason that I talked about these things today, is because that is one of the most important things we can do as human beings, is to explore other aspects of our cognition, other aspects of our mind. If we give it attention, it will grow. If we explore it, it will expand, rather than just the same old, which is what most conversation is, which is what most interaction with other human beings are, because that's where their mind is. That's what their mind is doing.
And I can see it in myself when I'm in different areas of the slider. Like when you were talking about feeling the pull of classes coming up. If you indulge that to, I hope I have everything I need. I don't know if this is going to be too much time, and am I going to, is it going to interfere with my, if you allowed your cognition to continue in the direction of the pull, then you're able to observe the breakdown of everything that you're saying. You're participating in a pattern that's societal, and that's been your own personal one in the past, and you're allowing your cognition to follow that by being reactive instead of engaging your non-ordinary cognition. And you don't even have to make a judgment about it at this point. You have broken down your own practice to the degree that you don't have to label it and judge it. You can just feel it and redirect. And I think that's why you and Jerry are saying the same thing. That's why she just typed redirect, is that you're hearing Ernest describe these things, and you're saying, but I don't even do that. I don't even do that. I think you are doing it. You are observing it. You are attracting different things, and you're not being exposed to other things because you're practicing. He's just breaking down the elements of it. When you notice something happening, you redirect, and it happens more effortlessly for you now because of your practice. But if you were to describe that interaction to somebody else, it would involve the same words that Ernest are using, like manipulation, trying to agree. All the destroyers were involved in that, from the other person, from you, from not you. You have just navigated them much more elegantly because of your practice. And Ernest was just using the words to break that down. And you say, that doesn't happen to me. It does happen to you. You're just navigating so elegantly, and you're not analyzing it. He's kind of doing both at the same time, just for the sake of teaching it to us.
And that's, I agree with everything you're saying. The only thing I would contemplate right now in this moment would be, and God, my edit button, I don't really have one anymore, but why would he even bring it up? I mean, Ernest is living a deliberate life. Things are where he puts it. Why would you even, I mean, I can relate absolutely to that manipulation. And if I'm going to experience it, it's going to be with my family. That would be my number one example.
That's your
You know,
battleground.
yeah. If you had to pick a spot, it's like if anybody's going to manipulate, project, skip steps, I mean, the dysfunction of the family, it's a big battleground.
But it is happening on a subtle level with the majority of the
That's what I-
interaction of people because of the overall volume of thinking that is
Yes.
societal and cultural in nature. You just don't break it down anymore. It was very valuable for us in the beginning of the practice because we weren't aware of those subtleties. But now that we're navigating a little more elegantly, we don't even look at them
Yeah,
like they,
exactly.
it's
That's what I'm
just-
saying. We just don't need to give that energy. He just said it that what you focus on grows.
I
So
understand,
I
but
don't
now
need to
that he's
focus
talking
on,
about hydrostasy, those subtleties still exist, and that's what that whole slider is about. Probably
yeah,
you're not over on that left-hand side of the slider anymore, so we don't have to define it in such gross terms. But there are a lot more subtle terms that happen when you're navigating hydrostasy because we're human beings on the planet, existing
exactly.
in a culture with overall on a planet with an overall volume of thinking, that it's always going to be in the soup that surrounds us to some degree or another. It's just to a much finer degree. We don't have to focus on it, but he's trying to teach something to us now, so it has to come up, and he's using the same language as he did in the beginning so
Yeah.
that there's a consistency there.
I get it, but we're not new students. So
No, but
not the beginner group here.
no, and I won't talk about deliberate folly to a beginner group for that reason. So that we're talking about some of the later stages of hydrostasy, which was where deliberate folly falls in, which is why it was appropriate to discuss. And depending on questions, I could go into techniques and things like that. But yeah, I mean, the more you see, which is the one of the, the derivatives of this practice is perspective, you can see these dynamics. You see these things unfolding before you, and it's not good, it's not bad, it's not plus, it's not minus. But if I intend to share it, I have to talk about it, and I put it into the system in a place where we assume that if we're even discussing these topics, we have created space in the overall amount of cognition. Remember, that was a prerequisite for hydrostasy, and the hydrostasy topics is to have those four elements, one of them being impeccable self-awareness and yada yada. So that's basically saying that this is not beginner topic. This is something that it will be appropriate for this group the more that they embark in warrior training. And if I'm being, a very strict teacher, a lot of people have skipped the step of warrior training, and I see it, and I'm not going to point it out, and I'm not going to talk about it because some people haven't asked me to do that. That would be a form of interference and trying to control, which is why if you stop attending class, I don't check up on you. I'm not, is everything okay? That's not my place. My place is to create the space, make it available, and answer questions if they come up. It's not to go try to get people to come to class and spend money and me check up on them and do all that kind of stuff. I have made the space available. I'm ready to answer questions. And today's the last. Today's the end of these 20 topics. And it's the most important things that I could discuss with a person are these 20 topics. And one of them is the incessant tendency to think all the time. And when we're in this practice, especially in hydrostasy, we're not doing that. And so a person through this practice, people have asked, well, how do I interact? Like, how do I live in a world? Carlos Castaneda asked this of Don Juan. He's like, how do I live in your world of sorcery and in the world of Los Angeles? And Don Juan said, you're being stupid. You're acting as if these are mutually exclusive. You can combine them. You don't have to choose one or the other. And that's what deliberate folly is really all about, is in warrior training, what thoughts are we redirecting? Using the rule of three. Anytime they come up, the second they come up, we rule of three. It eventually leads to two.
Us and them.
Us and them. When people are talking, what are they talking about? Us and them. Typically, they're talking about themselves, they're talking about other people. What are the other warrior training traps? And granted, not all conversations are going to do this, but we have to stay alert. We have to stay doing our practice so that when these things occur, it doesn't take us out of our own practice, which these conversations inevitably will if we just allow ourselves to just be engrossed in these conversations with other people. So deliberate folly is a tool. It's a mechanism to make sure that you stay doing your practice while still interacting with the world, still holding down a job, still being able to do the things that we normally do. And then the internal alchemy, while I haven't talked much about that topic, it really lends from traditional Chinese medicine, but there is something that we can begin to perceive in the human experience that falls into non-ordinary cognition. The energy body, whether we call it chi, whether we divide chi up, prana, I don't care, the energy body can be felt. And through the alchemy practice that I begin introducing in warrior training, you will begin to develop attention on that feeling. And before you know it, you're in that luminosity effect where you don't want to go away from that. It doesn't necessarily feel good. It's not good or bad because it's not an emotion. Granted, the emotions that tend to come from it are kind of nice. You know, I'm not declaring war on the emotions that come from my connection to the infinite, but I'm also not clinging and attaching to it. I'm not chasing it. I'm not trying to get there. One of the things that people do and they don't realize it is they have attached to what they call good feeling. And now all we want is good feeling, good feeling, good feeling, good feeling. But it's very undefined in what these good feelings are, where they come from, how we get there. So some of the things that I've created on this base, appreciation, that appreciation itself isn't an emotion, but the derivative from the focus and the appreciation and the attention, there will be an emotional derivative that you can count on, but you're not chasing that. You're not
Oh, I find that whole process exactly what I'm doing, much bumpier than you are, obviously. But yes, that whole thing about the animals, the animals being in my energy space, like when I am doing the energy body thing, that's when the connection with life expands. I don't know how to describe it. And there's a feeling associated with it. And
Yes.
when I'm not doing it, I do try to chase it. I'm like, okay, what am I doing with my, let me, all the things that I do
What does
to
that mean for animals? You said animals.
earlier in the class, I was talking about how I find that animals, nature, gets closer to me when I am balanced in the slider. And I am
If you're out
engaged.
on a walk, you mean literally?
Yeah, not just
Is
on
that,
my
yeah.
walk, in my life, yes. But
Oh,
a lot on my walk, because that's where I practice those things the easiest. And then I try to continue to embody that throughout everything and the feeling of it, like the vacation feeling. I try to deliberately modulate to that place. But yes, my walk is the place that I interact with all of these things easiest. So
and
that's
the
where I do
birds,
it.
and you're talking about animals. That's what you meant. The
Yes,
animals
yes.
out.
So
Squirrels on your porch, kind
yes,
of
that
thing.
energy
Yeah.
body. Yes, that
Yeah.
energy
Awesome.
body is really where animals must perceive something. There's another perception other than hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, So and I feel like I'm perceiving things with other senses, and the way nature and people respond to me are evidence that that's true, that there is something else happening, and that I am um, um, creating. I'm shaping the clay of my experience is the best way that I can by doing that, and I do try to chase it. Instead of just relax into it. There's a difference of relaxing into it and holding all those points of attention and allowing it to expand. Yes, the lens of perception. Sometimes the lens of perception gets clouded with my cognition, and it's very subtle and insidious. I've allowed it to occur because I'm not embracing the embodiment of all my points of attention. I haven't looked at my card, or I haven't referenced my whatever. And then I try to chase that feeling when it's not happening. I feel the pull away from it, and I do try to chase it. It's a much bumpier ride, but it's getting smoother. It's just like going from presence and mindful, forgetting and remembering. It's still forgetting and remembering. It's the exact same thing. It's just with a different amount of momentum behind my practice. That's all. It's the same principles.
And that theme will come up more and more because this is a principle base. I don't violate principles. The principle is balance. And a lot of other teachings violate principles when they find it convenient. So,
And when I'm out of it, I do see my projection. It's my projections. It's me wanting to feel good. And I see that insidiously happens, though. It's not default anymore, but it's still within my realm and capacity to it's just like walking up to the water cooler when there's gossip and getting sucked into gossip. Like it's the principles, all the principles apply. Chasing it is counterproductive because I'm doing it with thinking, and
right.
I'm doing it with a desire to achieve some state that is not is it's not a stagnant state. It's a practice. I'm practicing or I'm not practicing, and to degrees it changes to degrees all the time. And that's where deliberate folly comes in, because I'm engaging other people. So there has to be some element of deliberate folly there. It's all,
Right.
it's all good.
Yes. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And so while a conversation with somebody about some shit, I don't know, it can be nice, it can be beautiful, but just wait until more human beings start to connect on the energy side of things. When the energy body of one person is connecting and communicating with the energy body of another person, we get all of the magical experiences that we love so much. Romantic, personal, it doesn't matter. When two human beings collide with minds that are relaxed, attention that for whatever reason, whether it's accidentally or intentionally, have found themselves converging, that connection point of attention, that is magical. That is far more than any conversation in words that we could have. When you are with somebody and you've just enjoyed 30 seconds or 60 seconds of comfortable silence without even knowing it or without disseminating it or breaking it down, those are some of the most beautiful experiences we have with other human beings, are the ones that are steeped in non-ordinary cognition. And we love it, we crave it, we want it, we desire it, but we don't always know what it is that we're desiring. We think it's the other person, or we think it's the circumstances or the condition or the words. We think it's the conversation and the shit that we just talked. There is so much more happening on an energy dynamic, an energy realm. I don't want to say level. I don't like the word level, but it's on the energy side of things. Ordinary cognition is on the physical side of things, matter and job and, all of that, the shit people talk about. So what I'm actually pointing out is that you can have beautiful conversations. I've had them. We've all had them. Good. We can go to some of the most pristine, connected, beautiful relationships with other human beings that go beyond words. And really what I'm doing is I'm helping to set the stage for exploration on the individual level. And when the exploration on the individual level occurs, it can start to occur on the fifth destroyer level, where the fifth is no longer a destroyer. It never really is. That's the way I label it because of the direction it's heading. It's a destroyer. But really, the fifth destroyer is really just an element. It's a force that we create because of the amount of human beings and the momentum of our existence, and it creates a force unto itself. And eventually, I hope that force goes beyond words. It goes beyond just simple fucking chit chat. It will get into the depth, the enormity of what is available to us, the expansive nature of what is available to the human being, that all goes beyond words. So I see a future every morning where we're not just sitting around having beautiful conversations, we're sitting around collaborating with one another on an energy level, on a physical level, on every level. And it is beautiful, it is harmonious, and it's not just the same old, which is ordinary cognition, is always going to be the same old to some extent.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. And that is the explanation. I mean, it's about connection. I live on planet Earth with human beings. That's the body I'm in, and everybody else is. So I don't know who else I'm going to interact with and connect with if it isn't humans. Do we connect with nature? You
Mhm.
know, the hidden elements.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But yeah, connection. Yeah, yeah.
But it's the non-visible element of you connecting to the non-visible element of the other person, and you can never get there by talking about it.
I have a little example.
But we can't experience it because I have no doubt I experienced it yesterday because
It
I
can be,
chose to.
of course. Yeah,
I looked, I listened, I was present.
there's some
Yeah.
basic,
I mean,
basic
the burlap lady just, wow, somebody stopped by and actually cared about what I was doing. I don't know. But it was, yeah. Okay. Anyway, go ahead, Donna.
Oh, you could give your example. I'm sure it's similar. I'm sure it's parallel. I don't mean similar. I was walking the boardwalk. I was in my, I was balanced in my slider. Is the only way I could describe that without a lot of words. And I was definitely feeling my energy body. My bulb of perception just seemed to be enormous. And as I was walking over the bridge of water, there was a man sitting on a bench meditating. It seemed obvious to me that he was in a meditative state, probably somewhere in the center of his slider at the moment. And just as I was approaching, he was in the same linear plane as me as I was approaching. A bird came and one of those black ones with the red wings. I don't know what they're called, but they're beautiful. They're coming around now, and their speech, the bird's ability to vocalize, is varied, and it's really seems very clear to me what's a call to another bird, what's a singing of some celebration, and what's a distress sound. They're very distinctly different. At least that's how I interpret it. It could be made up in my head. I don't care. So I came up and this bird landed and he looked right at the man, but we were in the same line. And it started singing to him, like right at him. And it was very close. And as I was walking, I got closer to them and I was passing across, and it pulled his attention from where he was. The bird pulled, he brought his attention to the bird. The bird was seeking his attention, close contact, singing to him. And if it could dance, looked like it was dancing to me. And it just made me laugh. And as I walked by, I said, I think he's talking to you. And he turned to look at me and he said, because I was in the same line, because the bird was looking at him, but it could have been looking at me. And he said, oh no, I think he's talking to you. And we both laughed. And I know we were communicating a very, very similar experience. The bird pulled his attention, it pulled my attention. He was wondering who the bird was singing to. I said it was him, he said it was me. It was an alignment, a crossing over of paths that I can energetically, that's the only way I could explain it. And that connection of all of those things in that moment was illuminated. And it was joyful to me. And as I passed, I thought, I didn't think. It's just that's what I chase sometimes. I chase that feeling and I realize that I can have it. And it doesn't have to be, I didn't have to think, is this the man for me? Am I going to meet him again? Do I have to recreate this experience? I want to live with somebody like that. It was just a moment in time that overlapped and it was joyous. And I can have lots more of those moments if I stay in that. Yeah, he was cute. He was an Asian man that I think was maybe a little older than me, but yeah, he was cute. Everything was cute. Everything was beautiful in that moment to me. And it was because it was illuminated.
I completely agree. I mean, that's connection. And there isn't a human being on the planet that doesn't look for that as well. That's universal. How we
If
get there
they can
differently.
feel it, you know, it's so much more
We can't
it's
go down,
personal power to know that
we
you
can't go down that
can
path.
create it instead of just have brushes with it.
That sounds a little bit judgy in my humble opinion, but I'm just saying every human being can relate to that. How they're getting there, how they're experiencing it. Is it a choice? Is it not a choice? But every human being has the ability to feel that. And I do know exactly what you're talking about. And that's why wouldn't that be a beautiful choice in that moment that you just naturally responded to, because that was your present moment. Yeah, beautiful. You're muted.
That's what made me stay with this practice is 100% within my capacity and 100% within my responsibility. And that's true for every human being. To what degree I do that in any present moment or anybody else does that in any present moment is what makes the world go round.
I would say, just to interject, outside of what I guess the way that they use it is non-ordinary cognition, or a brain that isn't normal. We can't speak for that. That's an area of psychology that we're not qualified to speak about. So
Right,
while
of course, deliberately existing above the threshold of recognition or below the threshold of recognition requires certain things of the
a certain thing,
brain.
yeah,
Yeah.
self-recognition and the ability to isolate aspects of your environment and data. And while I want to say everybody can do it, the scientific part of my mind says that that hasn't been determined yet. So I'm very careful about how I talk about things.
Well, maybe it was my words, but
No,
there's no doubt in my mind,
where you're going.
every human being
Yeah.
can feel that connection and desires it. And when they feel it or have had it on some level, whether they were, you know, intending delivery, every human being knows that.
But see, the interesting thing is that's how I began the day, is talking about non-ordinary cognition, and how, whether people know it or not, that's what they're seeking. That's what they want. You know, when two people, if we talk about like romantic situations, their best interaction is typically going to be steeped in non-ordinary cognition, and that's why they love it so much. That's why they want it so much, because it connected them to something that goes beyond physical. And remember, ordinary, physical, non-ordinary is what we would say is maybe unknown, or we don't know much about it, or it still falls into the non-physical realm. And judgment, I mean, everybody judges. We all have a judgment thought. It's what we don't want to do is chase those thoughts. Discernment, judgment, logical deduction, all of those things occur. Most of the time, what we're talking about is statistical anomaly. We're talking about things that can be observed. Judgment is usually an opinion about something. If a tree falls and it's covering our path, I'm not judging it. I'm discerning that our path is covered. If I can logically deduce that what I'm doing with my mind is uncommon, then I can logically deduce that what is occurring in most people's minds is common. That's why we're using the word common and uncommon. It's not necessarily a form of opinionated judgment. It's a form of statistical anomaly. You can see the difference between consistency and you can see the difference between anomaly. You can explore that data and come to a reasonable conclusion, also accepting that that reasonable conclusion will change over time. And hopefully what we view as non-ordinary, ordinary, we don't even need this discussion, because everybody is steeped in both. And ultimately, with this practice, and I'm going to bring this to a close because this is the end. You know, this is the end of the hydrostasy practice. This is the end of Qigong. This is the end of anything that I have to offer to anybody. The internal alchemy process will help a person sense the energy body. Once you can sense and discern the energy body in the present moment, there will be a derivative, but you don't have to chase it. There is connection, but you don't have to chase it. It is desirable, but you don't have to sit and think about it. The desire is latent, it's underlying. The desire to connect, the desire to expand our consciousness, the desire to create and grow. These are principles of the human existence in general, in what is most common. Again, A person could have an abnormal brain structure, and with that structure, I can't say. You know, there have been documented reports of people who are antisocial, using the word correctly. Antisocial being somebody who cannot exist in a society because they have absolutely no value of life, of human life. That is a brain that is operating differently than the majority. And I don't know if that brain can sense into the infinite and feel connection and all of these different things. I'm not going to make that statement. I hope so. You know, I really hope that it's accessible and possible and everything else, but I'm not going to make those claims because there's no statistical data or even empirical data for me to really make that statement. So typically, if I'm making a statement, I will say whether it is, you know, we have theoretical evidence, whether we have empirical evidence, or whether we have no fucking evidence at all. I'm okay saying which is which. But ultimately, with the internal alchemy, we can start to sense the energy body, and you can sense where it's not flowing smoothly, and you can smoothen it out on your own through your behaviors, through your actions, through your cognition, through the way that you interact with the fabric of the cosmos. And ultimately, it leads to a healthier body, a healthier mind. You're doing things that are healthier. And again, it's going to be unique to the individual. So for Donna, maybe it's not eating meat. For Jerry, maybe it's just not having ice cream 3 times a day, only 2. Everybody's balance is a little bit different. We're all on a different continuum. We're all changing at different rates. We're all learning at different rates. So this whole idea that we should be this or should be that is completely erroneous. And that breaks up the judgment. There is no room for thinking thoughts about what other people should be doing. That's the definition of non-interference, is you're not thinking those thoughts about how other people should be behaving or what they're doing. However, try walking through a big city and not making any interaction with your attention with other people. It will feel unnatural. Why does it feel unnatural? Because attention is a tangible thing. And your tangible attention is interacting with other people's tangible attention. And although you don't know why it feels the way it feels, or we don't know what is occurring technically or mechanically, when 2 attentions cross paths, you have formed a type of connection, and that can be felt. So if you're ignoring somebody, or if you're trying to do certain things, all of that can be felt to a certain degree. So eventually, all of this interaction is all a feeling. That's what hydrostasy is it can all be. And when I say feeling, I don't necessarily mean emotion. I mean, it's a part of our perception. It is a part of our ability to perceive the world around us. My thesis, the reason for this class, the reason for the 20 classes, the reason that I share anything is because there is an entire area of human existence that we're barely even brushing on. To Jerry's point, yeah, some people have flirted with it. Some people have touched it happenstancely. Some people have done a variety of different circumstances to arrive at and that's Abraham Hicks again. It's the feeling that they're wanting and not all of the circumstances and everything else. And what we're learning through this practice is that we can access that aspect of the human experience deliberately, intentionally, and willfully with practice. And that when we do that, we expand our consciousness, we expand our body, we expand our mind, we expand everything, and that will allow us to survive. It will allow us to adapt. Well, it will allow us to adapt, which allows us to survive, which allows us to continue as a species. And in 100 years, 1,000 years, who knows what people will be doing with their cognition, because they didn't limit themselves. The human species right now is stuck, and it's limiting itself in ordinary physical cognition. And it's always wanting to bring non-ordinary to the ordinary so that it can understand it, so that it can control it, so that it can make predictions. And that is what science is. Science is what it's wanting to do is be able to create a mechanism of prediction. We want to be able to predict outcomes based on experimentation and how things happen most often. And that's where the data comes in. That's where the scientific method comes in. But we want to be able to predict that if we do A, it's going to lead to B, which eventually leads to C, and that we can predict that. That's science. That's the scientific method. That's what that's there for. It's not required. It's great, and we can consistently bring the non-ordinary to ordinary, but we don't have to. We can also surf in the unknown and let it be unknown until it speaks to us, until in some way it reveals itself in a form of ordinary cognition. So the alchemy helps a person. This is a part of warrior training, and I'll deliver this all as a part of Igong still. But the internal alchemy will help you with the sensitivity of your own body. And guess what? You have to relax your mind. Everything I'm talking about has a prerequisite of creating space in the overall amount of cognition. Doesn't matter if it's good, doesn't matter if it's bad, doesn't matter if it's positive, doesn't matter if it's negative. You can have a beautiful conversation for every second of every day for the rest of your life, and you will be cutting yourself off from the potentiality of what is available in the energy body, because the overall volume of thought is still the same. So the point of me teaching, the point of me offering all of the things that I offer and doing the things that I do is because A, I think it is necessary for the human species to survive. That's pretty important. And then B, I have a knack for organizing things, and I do it really well. My mind is very good at observing, organizing, recreating in a form of dongjing, understanding the elements that I have to work with at my disposal. And I can fashion that and communicate it, and then ultimately I can do it. The better that I can communicate it with myself, the better I can do it. But if I can communicate it with myself, chances are I can communicate it with another person, and that's what we're doing here. I've created my own practice for myself, and I'm sharing it because it will benefit other people who choose to do it. Does that make
And you
sense?
share it so well. You're so good at it.
Well, thank you.
Just blessed, appreciate everything we've done these years, and look forward to more, but you just really share it well.
And I mean, I have to say, I think the reason that is because I'm doing it. If I wasn't steeped in it myself, I wouldn't be able to share it as well. I would start to I would use words that everybody else is using because there's no other way to talk about these things because I haven't experienced it firsthand. I'm missing that part of knowledge. Well, I'm not, because I'm doing the practice as much as anybody else, or as much as I would ask anybody else to. I'm speaking from experience, and that allows me to speak it so well and to organize it so well and to be able to deliver it so well because I'm doing it myself. And I do see a world where the vast majority of humanity is feeling this luminosity. All throughout space and time and history, human beings have talked about it because, to Jerry's point, people have experienced it. They've had brushes with it, or through whatever means, they've put themselves in that position where they feel that light, that connection, that luminosity between all things. When you feel that, when you perceive that, you can highlight it and it can grow, and that will launch you into the unknown. And then you're making...
sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you've really said it best all these years. Doesn't come up every class or anything like that, but every once in a while you'll make it very clear by your words, and it's not even a lot. We are it. So when I go throughout my day with just a cognizant sense of that, it changes my interactions everywhere I go.
Yes.
And with whoever so for me, it's never us and them, their common mind, even though of course I use that word too, but I'm just saying, I try to be cognizant of that and just put it in my perspective and everything that I'm interacting with. Because I do believe when you say that, I think it's true. And if I believe that it's true and I live a principle-based life, it's just going to change on how you interact with people. Just because I think my mind is potentially a little more relaxed, or I might be a little bit more open in this moment, the person I'm talking to is just as much. We are it.
Yes.
No levels, like you say. It's just a recognition of remembering, I guess, when you say that.
Yeah. And then sometimes the distinctions are for organizational purposes, not for declaring war on common versus uncommon. That's the exact opposite of what I would hope to achieve. by using those terms. The terms are just because we're talking about the dynamics of what's occurring. So if you're doing this practice, you're doing it. If you're not doing this practice, you're not doing it. And so on one hand, we'll have a bunch of people who aren't doing it, and we'll have a few people who are doing it. That is an us and a them. It creates the us and the them, but it's not the type where you're attaching to it, clinging to it, highlighting the separation to emphasize the separation, which increases the separation. None of that is occurring, but either you're doing it or you're not. That is the biggest difference. And there is no, it could be 2 degrees, but there is no middle ground. You are either doing this practice or you are not. And it can be 2 degrees, of course, but still, you are either doing this practice or you are not. That's the beautiful thing about it, is that you could do it or not. But it's
And it starts to become you. And I know when you say that, or when I say that, you want to caveat me just a little bit, and I appreciate that. But Donna said it earlier. So it's not like I'm thinking about it. Yeah, I mean, there's so much redirection and feeling that's going on throughout the day that I'm not adding words to it. I'm living in it. I feel it. I redirect. I can sense it. Not a lot of words. It starts to become you, where yes, I'm having to redirect, remind myself, where's your mind, Jer? Come on. But it does start to change the synapses in your brain or something, because I don't feel like I'm the same person anymore. And I'm not creating levels. I'm just saying there's parts of me that were there when we started this. I don't even meet up with them anymore. It's like that person, it just doesn't even exist. So I can't even feel it anymore because it's just not there.
No,
It's
I
gone.
get it.
There's parts that are just gone.
They've dissolved in your lack of attention on them.
Yes. And the direction of your attention being so strongly somewhere else, you don't give it the energy it needs to exist, such as for me, things like anger. My cat still kind of irritates the shit out of me when she meows nonstop for 6 hours or 7 hours with that moaning meow. But I don't get angry, So like you said, I can notice that things are changing and I'm not the same person. Although let's look at this how you're talking about it. On the micro level, I am almost exactly the same, right? I am the infinite, but we have to find a balance between infinite and finite, literal and non-literal. And the way that that looks is that you are an individual person with an individual mind, an individual body. You have individual likes, individual dislikes. You're doing something with your mind that other people may not be doing. That's all unique and individual. And yet we're all one, man. So we have found 2 contextual opposites, combine them as not the same. They're not the same. They're 2 contextual opposites. We combine them together and it creates a third thing that I call personal power, the power of balance. And so it's not always personal power, it's just power, the power of the sun, the power of the atmosphere, the power of the earth, the power of the atom that creates the perfect sphere. It's occurring. So, but what you've also described, Jerry, is the evolution of your own consciousness, which creates an old you, a new you, a you that's different than the you that you used to be. So we have the relative and we have the absolute. Relatively, very few people that I'm around are practicing Qigong. Relatively, very few people are deliberately, willfully engaging the luminosity of the present moment in a visceral, connected way. And if somebody were to come out of the sky and say, Ernest, what are you doing with your mind? I would say, which answer do you want? Do you want the quick answer where I say I'm just being very present? Or do you want the real answer where I tell you what I'm doing with the light of my awareness and the fabric of my being connect, and I feel that in the moment, right? That creates a separation. It just does. It's a differentiation rather than anything. And we can embrace both. We can embrace the unique differentiation of each individual and the all one totality of the fabric of the cosmos, which, spoiler alert, is fundamental intelligence itself. That is at the fabric of the cosmos. And intelligence isn't information. It's not knowledge. It's not any of those things. Intelligence is the most efficient way to move, the most efficient way to evolve and adapt, or adapt and evolve. So,
Efficiency. I love that word.
With
You
no
should-
distortion of the lens of perception.
Right.
It's a clear lens of perception, allows you to see that the intelligence of the fabric of the universe. If your lens of perception is cloudy, then you may have brushes with it, but you don't know, you don't, the self-awareness mechanism is seeing through a clouded lens. So that's what the varying degrees of existence can be described as.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily better. It's not necessarily worse, but we're not wasting the complete other half of the human experience because we're so steeped in the world. We're so steeped in ordinary cognition. But we still have I still have ordinary cognition. That's the thing, is it's usually when people see these separations at the very outset, I said that we don't identify one as being better or worse, or we just need balance. The unique individual aspect of Ernest balanced with the infinite connected fabric of the cosmos, Ernest. Combine those two together and you get a third thing called balance and power. The individual unique nature of my mind and how it moves, which is different than others. There is a me and there is a they. I'm doing with my mind and they're doing with their mind. However, there's also that unique, connected, or I guess it's not unique, it's yeah, unique implies differentiation, but it's the more connected, total, fundamental aspect of the human experience, which is the universal experience.
Which Jerry was trying to describe in having a connected moment at a nursery with her spouse and herself and the person at the nursery, and engaging with the energy of the plants and
Yes.
that kind of thing. And what I tried to describe with the bird and the man and the walk on the beach, overlapping, all of that overlapping and happening simultaneously with awareness, allowing as many aspects of that to become our experience in the same moment.
Right. Now, what we don't do is we don't place emphasis or value on the differentiation. That's the error. That's when you start to other, and that's when you start to put yourself on a, that's not necessary.
Or chase it, and then that becomes a thing to chase, and that's not desirable either. Just noticing, it's like remembering, forgetting. How far am I, how much am I allowing in it in a present moment, and how much am I not? And I have the tools to do that, and where am I in the slider? And how do I want to influence? Sometimes I'm not in that space in the slider, and it's okay because I require a lot of thinking right now to accomplish a task, and it's okay. I know where it is. I can still feel it. I know how to get back into balance, but I do chase it sometimes because it's so luminous and glorious. I want to be in that space all the time, and that's not realistic.
Well, yes and no, but yes. All right, and so that is, I think, pretty much covers all the 20 topics. The thing that I would mention, though, is that the internal alchemy, for the best of my ability, is the path to better physical health. So the physical body will, I don't like the word heal because that implies that we're constantly broken, and that's just a weird dynamic to talk
We'll
about.
be able to achieve homeostasis.
Yeah, maintain homeostasis, allow it to gain more momentum and more visceralness and even more power. But one of the things that maybe you guys will come to see and accept is that non-ordinary cognition can't be talked about. We can make art. I can write an entire book to try to convey just one little speck of the feeling. Right? I can talk about like light but I'm not really talking about it. Like I'm just doing the best that I can, and that's okay. So one of the things that we can begin to accept is not everything has to be taken to ordinary cognition. We don't have to be able to think about everything, control everything, and understand the mechanism of everything. That's not necessary. the understanding is always delivered to us when we're ready. You know, I don't say ready, but the mind is aligned to the information and everything aligns perfectly. And then it's like, aha, I get it. That's great. You didn't chase that. You didn't try for that. You didn't attempt, it came to you, you came to it. That's the law of attraction. So with this system, you know, from beginning to end, I believe that it could completely revolutionize a person's consciousness and their ability to connect to the infinite. And there's nothing that we could really, you know, I've said everything I can say about non-ordinary cognition, really. Like, I give you the luminosity, that's the word I use to kind of give you the impression that there's brightness and connection. And this is all shitty words, honestly, to describe what I'm hoping to describe. Like, these words are terrible. Like, these words just don't cut it because there's no words to describe it yet. Like, there's not a lot of words to describe these areas of cognition in the human experience that are non-ordinary and get less attention because we're too steeped in ordinary cognition.
And why do we need to talk about it? We don't, right? I mean,
Well, if
if,
we're giving a class, we need to talk about it. If
oh
we
yeah,
share
right,
it, we
right.
need to
Yeah,
talk.
from where you're sitting,
You don't need
yes,
to talk about
yes,
it if you're not to
yeah,
teach.
but otherwise, it's just living it, and
Otherwise, we have to
yeah.
communicate. And I've been very specific, Jerry, not just to talk about it, but to give technique. That's the key. I have given so much technique that a person can do rather than just talking shit about it. So yeah, you're right. There's a certain point. Maybe, Jerry, you decide that you never really want to share this outside of, you will always share it. Like, that's the two opposites. You're not specifically sharing it, but you're putting that energy into the fifth element, that fifth destroyer, and you're changing it. Whether you like it or not, whether you intend to do it or not, it's happening. So you're already affecting change, whether you're doing it intentionally through classes or whatever. But I could perfectly see a person who says, you know what, I don't, that's not my knack. I don't really want to teach. I don't really want to share. I don't really want to communicate. And that person will use far less words than I do when I come to class because I need to share it. And one of the reasons I do that, Jerry, is because I do feel this strange sense of responsibility to help my own species evolve beyond, not necessarily beyond, but to access what is accessible to us. We're just not doing it. We're brushing it. That's what the lens of perception. Last week I talked about the difference between a modulation and a complete shift. Like, when you're just, you know, well, actually, I think I might have that different. Oh, the opposite. Yeah, the shifting, the difference between a tiny little shift and a complete modulation, or the other way around. But the idea is that you have one little and a total change. What we're talking about now is the total change. And that does put you on an island because statistically not that many people are doing it. And that's okay too. It's not because we're not doing the thoughts of us versus them. We're not, I'm better, I'm on this island, you're just a petty common thing. That's the error. And that error
Yeah.
isn't occurring.
Then I do remind myself of that yes, Ernest, this is his passion. He created this. He has words for it. He knows how to share it well. This is his future. Yes, of course, you're always bringing that to the table. So I would never want to discount that in any way. I guess I was just talking, excuse me, just matter of factly in the class that as we progress in this practice, there's just changes that happen. And for me, one of them is I don't need to walk around talking about it all the time. You know what I mean? I just, that person that quit smoking or they've stopped drinking or they're now a vegetarian.
Oh,
And
yeah,
I
you're
got to
right.
talk about it with everybody. I'm not going to be that person.
Oh, well,
I'm
Jerry,
living my practice,
right.
and you never, and I've said this before, hey, you don't know where you're going to end up. 5 years from now, you could see me out on the TV circuit or something, sharing this, but it's just not, it's never been my goal personally here was because I thought I would be teaching it, but I do understand that absolutely that's where this is your passion and it's beautiful.
And no, I don't have to talk about it, really. I mean, I don't have to. I can just go out and live my luminous life and fuck all y'all. I could go do my thing. But There's just something about that that doesn't feel natural. That doesn't feel, it feels like I do have a responsibility to my species. And that does make sense, that the species would want to do what's best for its species in order for it to procreate and have longevity. So the reason I feel that is the fundamental of compassion. I feel compassion for other human beings, and I want them to be able to experience freedom the way that we freedom to have or not have and still feel free, not financial freedom or the rest of these things that people talk about. But you're right, Jerry. So, you know, I had I was going to write it down there. I forgot it. And it was something related to what you were saying, but I didn't type it out as a note, so it escaped me.
Oh, I started to say something about, vegetarian or something.
Oh,
You
yeah,
shook
that's where
your
the
head right away.
yeah, that's the principle of ask the questions, answer the questions that are asked. That's where that came from. I'll make myself available to answer questions, but I'm not going to go around preaching. That's the opposite of deliberate folly. So if someone's like, oh, I feel shitty, and I was like, well, that's because of your common cognition and the way that you're thinking all the time. You're creating the electrochemical physiological response, and that creates more situations that you get yourself into. And it's just a vicious circle. You're just chasing your tail and eating your own tongue.
Yeah,
just like-
yeah, we don't want to be those
That doesn't
people.
go over well, does it, Jerry? All of it's true. None of it goes over very well. So that's not a good way to speak about it. That's not deliberate folly. I said the truth. I spoke my truth. I said the honest thing. You know, someone is like, well, I can never just get a relationship. And I'll be like, well, that's because you don't present yourself as somebody who is relationship available. Like, I'm just making shit up. I could say that, but they didn't really even ask me. Like they're just venting. They're just saying some shit. How many times do you see somebody say something on Facebook and then somebody swoops in with their opinion, completely ignoring all the shit that they just said in their post and then just spouting their, that's what I'm talking about. That's not deliberate folly. That is all of the traps of attention coming out of your mouth. And that's what deliberate folly will help a person to avoid and stay in the warrior training practice and the hydrostasy practice by not making those errors. And so I will do a little mini book. I'm going to do a little mini book that focuses on just a few, maybe not 20, but focuses on some of the elements that are not, that you won't see anywhere else. There are still so many mindfulness people. I'll stop the recording before I talk.